Hello, welcome to this podcast. It's called Gimme Empathy, and I'm the host, Scott Mercer. On this episode, I talk to recording engineer and musician Cam Smith, but I need to explain some things first. So this interview was not originally recorded for this podcast. In fact, this interview was originally recorded nearly 5 years ago. So for those playing along at home, Gimme Empathy is not my first attempt at a podcast. It's the third. My second attempt at a podcast was with my friend Nick Oberhart, who you may have heard on this podcast, and it was about the Star Wars Expanded Universe. We recorded a few episodes, but it never really got off the ground. Now, the first podcast I tried to get going, about 5 years ago now. And it was sort of in conjunction with my radio show Exit Stage Z on Community Radio 4ZZZ. It was called Only Talking Sense, and it was meant to make a bit of an oral history of music in Brisbane. And I recorded a few things for it, and they were all, kind of very life story kind of things. And sometimes Gimme Empathy episodes wind up like that, not always. So I recorded a few, and I edited a few, and I actually did put some out in edited form on the radio, but mostly just other things came up. And I never got around to releasing them on their own. And since then, other podcasts have come along with a similar scope to Only Talking Sense. And so it didn't really make sense to go back to that. And it was a bit of a bummer for a while. But then I came up with the idea for this podcast, which is much broader and easier to source people. And here we are. But the interviews I recorded for Only Talking Sense were pretty interesting, I think. And I think I will go back and revisit most, if not all of them, over time on Gimme Empathy. I'm staying with Cam Smith. So this episode is the old one. And I have also recorded a new interview with Cam, which is kind of interesting seeing how his perspective changed in 5 years. And that'll be the next episode out. If you've listened to previous episodes of Gimme Empathy, Cam's name has come up before. He operates his own recording studio, Incremental Records. He used to operate a venue in West End called The Waiting Room, which was really cool. He's been in heaps of bands, including Spirit Bunny, Terra Pines, Tape Off, Ghost Notes, Tiny Spiders, Mount Augustus, Little Scout, and many more. He has his occasional solo things, St. Augustus. You probably would have seen him and his huge beard out there on the scene at some point if you go and see little local gigs in Brisbane. So here we go. Enjoy this 5-year-old, well-seasoned, aged, grain-fed episode of Gimme Empathy, number 29, with Cam Smith. So...
Squeaky chairs.
Squeaky, they are squeaky. Cam Smith, thank you so much for talking to us today.
No worries.
Can I ask you, what was your favourite song when you were 12 years old?
When I was 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I've got to think of when I got to place that geographically. Where was I living when I was 12 years old?
You would have been in Western Australia.
I was in Western Australia then. So 95. Probably would have been like something by Oasis.
Oasis.
95, like probably What's the Story, Morning Glory. It probably would have been my favourite.
You were into Britpop as a young teenager?
Yeah, I liked Oasis. See, as a kid, I was on the Oasis side of the Blur Oasis divide, and then later that year, I got into the Foo Fighters. That was kind of the beginning of the end.
Have you changed sides in the Oasis Blur thing as time went on?
Or
are you still
I probably have. I don't know. I probably have more respect for Blur now because they've done, they've actually gone on and done some interesting stuff. But I don't own any Blur records. Actually, yeah, I'd still have those Oasis records on CD, and like I'd probably get more excited about a Oasis song coming on the radio or something if it was like a good one.
Yeah.
Although there's some awesome Blur songs like Beetle Bum. That's a classic. Can't go past that song.
So at age 12, you were in Western Australia, but you're originally from Melbourne.
I was born in Melbourne, yeah.
And you moved to WA when you were 10?
Yes.
You lived in a lot of different towns when you were over there. What was the cause of the move?
Oh, just parents working.
What did they do?
They worked in mining.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I was a mining kid.
Were they musical at all?
Yes, in so far as they really enjoyed music and they used to play a lot of it. We used to go on very long driving holidays a lot when I was a kid, before we moved to WA. And WA is necessitated because you live 1,000 kilometres from the city.
Else. Yeah.
But even before that, like when we lived in Melbourne, we'd go on these driving holidays and we'd listen to music a lot in the car on the journeys. And my sister and I used to sing along. We learnt all of the records, and we'd sing and we'd harmonise. And so, there was always pretty. There was always music around, and eventually I conned the parents into buying us They got us a guitar. My sister and I both wanted a drum kit, but they didn't want to get us a drum kit. It was too loud and too big, and probably too much money if we didn't actually go through with it.
Yeah.
So they just bought us an acoustic guitar, which I actually didn't play for a couple of years. I wasn't very interested. My sister started learning, but eventually I picked it up.
So are there any musical influences from your parents that really stayed with you?
Probably not, because they don't think my parents really listened to anything that I would still listen to, really.
Was it just sort of pop from their own youth?
It wasn't even that. It was pop from the 80s, and maybe some 70s. Like I remember, one thing I do remember that was good that they listened to, but I hated as a kid, was the Travelling Wilburys. My dad used to put that on sometimes, and after putting it on a couple of times and me just hating it, he eventually stopped putting it on, and I used to make fun of them and just say that they were terrible, and they weren't. Travelling Wilburys were actually pretty awesome, because a few years ago he put it on a car trip, and I was like, by then I'd heard the Travelling Wilburys a decent amount, and I was like, oh, this is the Travelling Wilburys, isn't it? He was like, yeah, it is. You hate them? I'm like, no, they're okay now. I quite like them.
It's funny how that happens. Like some music that you really, really hate when you're young, it just sort of gets really nostalgic if you haven't heard it for like 10 years or something.
Yeah. I think I didn't like their voices, because they're all, like, not all of them. I mean, obviously not Roy Orbison, but the others are all quite nasal singers.
Yes.
They've got the bit of like that sort of country twang to it, and I was still associating that with bad.
With uncool music.
Twang is bad, country is bad. And I don't think that anymore. So now I like them. But yeah, there wasn't much else that my parents listened to. I think they'd sort of gone through their good music phase.
It'd come and gone.
And they'd come out the other side and start listening to bad music.
And they were just settled into now whatever was on.
Yeah, kind of. Because I sort of, eventually, when I kind of discovered, their record collection, like their vinyl collection from when they were younger, that they'd sort of collected through the 60s and 70s, and it was full of great stuff. Like there was all this Beatles and The Who and Led Zeppelin and, heaps of great music.
But that wasn't what they listened to.
No, they weren't listening to that. And I was like, oh, what happened? And Mum was like, yeah, I used to like, my favourite band was Black Sabbath. I was going, what happened? Why don't you listen to Black Sabbath anymore? Black Sabbath are great.
It seems like at some point in a lot of people's lives, they just give up on music.
Yeah.
And just go with the flow.
Yeah, I can feel it happening.
Yeah.
I'm about to turn 30.
Really? Even you feel like you're...
Well, I think part of it's that I'm like, I don't go searching music anymore, because I kind of have so much of it brought to me anyway, so much local music, that outside of that, I don't really go looking very much anymore. And so I kind of just... Sometimes I feel like, I just listen to what I like. And the new bands that I listen to are often just kind of newer twists on things that I know that I like.
So you're not a mad dubstep fan?
I haven't delved. Maybe it's a perfectly legitimate genre. I don't really know. I'm not sure it's that much worth fighting against. Maybe it just is what it is. Maybe you should try and work against it a little bit.
Keep your mind open, at least, even if you're not necessarily going out of your way to fill it with things. While you were living in WA, did you ever actually live at Mount Augustus?
No, I've never actually been to Mount Augustus.
You've never actually been there? Okay.
No, because it's kind of... There's not much there other than Mount Augustus.
The Rock. There's an airfield there.
Yeah.
I believe, and there's a station at the foot of it.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, there's stations everywhere. Most of them have... It's flat, so you might as well have an airfield. But yeah, it's actually a fair way out of the main highway. Like, it'd be a couple of hours drive to get there, and you'd pretty much be going that couple of hours just to get there.
Yeah.
And then you have to drive back. So it's not really on the way to anything. So no, I haven't actually been there, but it's kind of a famous sort of landmark out there, the famous place.
It is. It's twice as big as Uluru, apparently.
The biggest monolith in the world.
Well,
supposedly.
They call it a monolith, but geologically speaking, it's actually a monocline.
Okay.
Apparently. I don't exactly know what that is, but that's what Wikipedia tells me.
So there is a difference.
There is a difference between a monolith and a monocline. We just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So moving around a lot in WA, I guess you would have gone to a lot of different schools.
We'll do a couple. Not a huge amount compared to some people, but probably more than average.
Did you make friends?
Moving
around?
I wasn't like an outcast, so I was okay. I didn't enjoy it very much when I moved to Queensland. I went to a boarding school in Toowoomba. And I found that hard. But the others were all good. I really enjoyed living in WA. I had a great time. It's a good place to live as a kid.
Travelling around the desert?
Yeah, it's great. Playing cricket and going fishing and riding around town. And it's good.
Age 14, your family moves to Kingaroy.
They did.
And you go to Toowoomba Grammar boarding school.
I did go. I was hoping to not mention the exact school, but sure, yeah, that's where I went.
I don't think do you plan on being libelous?
No. Well, no, probably not.
We can edit that out.
No, that's fine. No, keep it in. I'm not ashamed. I just
went to an unnamed prominent Toowoomba private boarding school.
Exactly. Yep. It could be a few of them.
So you didn't enjoy your time there?
Oh, it was fine. I just
your typical teenagerhood.
Yeah, I suppose so. I just sort of got there at an awkward time. Like, I sort of arrived halfway through year 10, and it's not a school that has a very high turnover of students. Like, you kind of start in year 8 and you finish at year 12. It's not a lot of new people that come in along the way, and certainly not halfway through year 10. So I was kind of the only new kid in my grade when I started. So
it was a bit hard to sort of...
Yeah, I just found... I don't know, there's just the people there. I didn't have a lot in common with many of that. Because I was a boarder, but I had more in common with the kids who were day kids. But they went home at the end of the day, and I stayed at school, and I didn't have a lot in common with. Eventually, I only found... I wasn't... Again, I had, there were people there that I was friendly with, but it was a little bit trickier.
Were you part of a particular crowd, like a clique?
No, that was kind of the thing. I had, friends, but there was I had a friend over here in this group, and a friend in this group, and a friend in this group, and
you're a social butterfly.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Did you do well at school?
Yeah, I was pretty good at school. So
that sounds like the words of a very modest man. Were you like ducks or something?
I wasn't ducks, but I did all right.
Did they have a music programs that you were part of?
No, because I didn't do music in school. So my musical thing at school was. And I suppose that the boarding school thing actually is important for why I do music, because because that was when I picked up guitar. That was when I went to boarding school, and I went there for the first term and was kind of miserable. And so when I went back for the next term, my parents were like, take the guitar, and at least it'll give you something to do. So I took it with me and started teaching myself. Mostly Nirvana songs and Foo Fighters and Smashing Pumpkins and all that sort of stuff. Lots of late 90s.
Okay, now this is a pivotal thing. I do want to talk to you about the Foo Fighters and Nirvana. So you're a big Dave Grohl fan. Always have been.
Yeah, well, as a drummer.
As a drummer, yeah.
Oh, I mean, I like him as a songwriter too. But, I mean, as a drummer, yeah.
So did you get into Foo Fighters first or Nirvana?
Yeah, Foo Fighters first and then Nirvana.
So that was the gateway.
Yeah, it was kind of
Nirvana.
So Foo Fighters first, and then through that into Nirvana and Pumpkins and Hole and Soundgarden, and from that, Radiohead and Godspeed You Black Emperor, and from there into Slint and the Jesus Lizard and all this. It goes on and on and on.
More and more obscure and interesting.
Yeah, you find out you like a band, and you want to find out what bands they like and what bands they were sort of ripping off, and you go and listen to those bands. That's sort of goes back to what I was talking about before. Like, I'm not listening to new music. I'm listening to the bands that I like. I'm at that point where I'm working backwards.
So working back to the roots of the music that you like. Yeah.
But I still try and listen to some new music when someone points it out and says, you really need to listen to it.
Have you kept up with the Foo Fighters' new music?
Yeah. The last album wasn't too bad. It had some good songs on it. The two before that were pretty atrocious. But I maintain that the first three records are great. The fourth one's good, but all the songs are too long.
Was that the double album, the fourth?
No, that was the fifth one. That was the
one.
one that was pretty atrocious.
Okay.
The first, and the one before that was that 1 by 1 record.
Oh yeah.
And which they disown now. They reckon it's crap.
Yeah.
But I actually kind of disagree. I just think that, he just got a bit lazy as a songwriter, and they all go for like 4 or 5 minutes when they all should go for like, 4 minutes at most. And that's basically what's wrong with the Foo Fighters ever since then. This that's my expert Foo Fighters opinion.
Yeah.
Is that he can actually write melodies and riffs just as well as he ever could, but all his songs go for too long, and you get bored of them by the end.
That's interesting. So do you think if he still had that sort of punk idea of making everything really short and sharp, do you think he'd be a better musician?
Yeah, I think so. I think he'd be putting out much better records. If I was producing the next Foo Fighters record, that would be what I would do with Dave Grohl. I would take a razor to his songs and say, come on, let's cut a minute. None of them going over 4 minutes unless they really deserve it. Yeah, but I reckon that's a good rule to go by anyway for any songwriter. 4 minutes. There's that awkward point in a song, like between sort of 4.5 minutes to like 6 minutes. Like before that, it's over quick enough that it generally won't overstay its welcome. And then once you get over 6 minutes, like the song kind of gets an epicness to it. There's enough space for it to flow and go on a journey. But in that 4.5 to 5 minutes, it's like this no man's land where it's not long enough to really stretch out, but it's too long to just be over. So that's another one of my music. I have lots of like, not necessarily rules, but guidelines, very strong guidelines.
Yeah.
for bands and for songwriters and stuff. They all come into play actually they don't necessarily come to play in my own music, because lots of songs that I write are in that horrible no man's land, and I just like leave them there. So, but yeah, a lot of my band members know all about my rules and guidelines.
You had your guitar at school.
Yep.
When did you start learning drums?
Well, I kind of did the Dave Grohl thing as a kid, like from like 10 years old.
The pillows.
Of the pillows on the bed.
Yeah.
And I'd have these couple of coat hangers, which was like would kind of rattle, and they'd be my hi-hats. And then like all these pillows arranged as like a snare and toms, and like the pillow that gave the biggest thwack, that was the snare. And then I just stomp my foot for the kick drum and would sort of play drums like that. So it wasn't until I actually got my own place like a couple of years into uni, and I was like, hey, I could get some drums now, buy a drum kit. I would have been like 19 when I got my first actual drum kit.
Dave Grohl said that when he did that, when he practiced on the pillows, it made him a much harder drummer because you had to hit them harder for them to make any noise.
Yeah.
Do you think that was true for you as well?
Maybe. I don't know.
Because you hit them pretty hard as well.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It's as good a reason as any. And it's fun playing drums. I love playing drums. It's the best instrument. And it doesn't have to be, drums don't have to be just keeping time and playing a straight beat. You can fuck with it. Can I swear?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, cool. All right, I just thought I should check. I just feel like, I don't know, impolite if I don't at least ask.
We'll issue a language warning.
Yeah, you can beep it out. It's all pre-recorded.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. I'll have to find an amusing sound effect for the swear words, like a wah, or like a siren or a klaxon or a duck, or I don't know.
You like a hip hop song?
Yeah, or a record scratch.
Yeah.
So when you were in high school, did you have any idea what you wanted to do with your life?
No, absolutely no idea. I still don't really know what I want to do with my life. 29 now. Yeah, no, I had no idea. Okay, for example, like when you get your OP and stuff, and you give all of your preferences for courses. I changed from like one degree to some other degree that was complete opposite spectrum of study, like on the night before you the deadline for putting your preferences in. So I had no idea. So I just did something.
But in the end, you did software engineering and e-commerce?
I did. This is getting very specific. Yes, I did.
Well, they sound like things that would have served you well in what you do now.
Kind of. Yeah, I was... just the other day, I was looking at databases for setting up a website for a record label. So, yeah, I don't know. It comes in handy, I suppose. Every now and again, you can make a website, kind of. Not very well.
On the whole, you didn't really like your experience at high school, but you did make a very important friend there. That's where you met Pat Elliott. Yeah,
I met Pat. He went to school with me, and we started making music together towards the end of year 12. We weren't really making music together, but we were playing together. because we sort of right at the end of year 12, he sort of discovered that I had been writing songs and recording them. So I had this friend called his friend Richard, who was like the like used to win all the music awards at school, and he had access to the music room after hours because he was a boarder as well, and they had like one of those digital 16-track machines, like the all-in-one machines.
Oh yeah,
like the Boss or Roland or whatever ones.
So you record it, you mix it, and
and you do it all on that. Yeah, so we that's what we started doing. Started making this record of recording all of these songs that I'd written and some that he'd written, and working on them together. And Pat was down at the boarding house one day, and he heard me playing some band, I can't remember what it was, but some band that not many people at that school would really listen to, that he liked. And he was like, who on earth could be playing that band in one of the boarding houses? So he came down to see who it was, and then we got talking, and I was like, oh yeah, I write, and I've been recording, and I gave him a copy, and he'd been writing and stuff as well, so we sort of started playing, and that was sort of like, right at the end of year 12, and so we were both moving to Brisbane, so we decided to keep going with it.
That's a really classic origin story.
Yeah.
Meeting at boarding school.
Yeah.
Mutual love of a band you were playing.
Yeah. And so, when we moved down, we made a band called Forever Green, which was the two we both used, and we wrote all these songs. Because, my parents were actually living in Africa at the time when I was in year 12. They'd moved to Namibia. So I kind of needed to come back and stay in Brisbane while I was like getting stuff sorted for uni, and I needed somewhere to stay for a week. So I came back and stayed with Pat, and we just spent a week writing songs together, which was, it was the first time I'd ever written a song with anyone else.
And what kind of songs were you writing back in those days?
Just alternative rock, late 90s, early 2000s, kind of listening to OK Computer too much, and Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and kind of ripping all those bands off in a fairly amateurish and somewhat tasteless fashion. It was like Muse, ripping Muse off, as much as it pains me to admit that. And like trying to get a band together with people who couldn't really play. We couldn't really play very well either, but we could play well enough that we could semi-convincingly, pull off the band thing. But we were sort of trying to rope in friends who were sort of only partially interested really in being in a band, and didn't own instruments and didn't really play. And we were kind of like trying to teach them how to play their instruments. And that was the thing, because like, even though I didn't own a drum kit, I was often like a better drummer than a lot of the drummers we were playing with, because they just weren't drummers. They were just people we were like, just come and join us, come make some noise. So eventually we found like actual drummers who could play, and started playing shows and stuff like that at the Melbourne Hotel back in the day, when it was a bit of a dive bar, and the Orient, which was the Orient was pretty nice, and like the Edinburgh Castle Hotel and Kedron. That was all fun. And like, a place like playing Rick's was like, I couldn't play Rick's. I mean, that's where good bands play at Rick's. Like that's you've made it if you play at Rick's. So we never played at Rick's with that band, but we did with our next band, because we kind of started realizing, it's not that hard actually. You just play shows, and you message these venues, and you get put on a Tuesday night, and hopefully you don't suck, and then you can play a better night with better bands.
So were you singing at that point?
Yeah, I did most of the singing pretty much from early on. So we used to split it, but I sort of did. It was weird because Pat, if we're ever going to be pretty much, it was fairly split, I suppose, the songwriting, but I used to sing more just because I was more confident with it. I was more comfortable. Pat didn't really like doing it. So he didn't really start singing for, I don't know, not in that band. Later on, I think the next band we made, he started.
All these venues you were playing, it sounds like it was a lot more decentralized, the scene at that point.
Yeah, well, that wasn't really, I don't think it's any different now. It's just that we weren't part of any cool scene. We didn't really know other bands to play with. We were just playing shows wherever we could play. And the venues that we were able to play tended to not be like the central cool venues in the valley. The ones that we did at the Melbourne Hotel, they were organised by a guy called Peter McPherson, who used to play in a band called the Pits back in the day, and he ran this these shows, and he started off at the Melbourne Hotel, and then I think he moved to the Jubilee, and then to the Orient, or maybe it was the Orient then the Jubilee, and he used to do these shows and under his little promotion name, which is Cubby House something. And he used to record them. He had like a little Zoom recorder, so you get a CD of your show, which was really awesome. And we used to do lots of shows for him, and actually we used to play with some cool bands like the Busy Men and lots of garage rock bands, like the Busy Men and the Dangermen and the Pits a lot, like kind of weird improv kraut bands, and eventually we sort of got to know a few like good bands around town, like the Rational Academy, and ended up playing some shows with Shuriken. In fact, the very last show for that band with Forever Green, it was at the Orient. It was supposed to be like a normal show, and then it was with Shuriken and the Rational Academy, and then the Rational Academy broke up about 2 weeks before the show. So Ben ended up, he still played. Ben did a solo set of like drone guitar fed into like a mixing desk with like feedback loops and stuff in the desk. And the day of the show, our drummer, he had a car accident or something like that, and he was in a bad mood, and he was just like, "No, I'm not playing. It's too much. It's too hard to go get my drums and get to the venue without the car, and I just can't be bothered." And we were like, we've got a car. We'll pick you up. We'll get the drums. It's all good. And he was just like, he just didn't want to do it, so he did it. And I think we just decided that's it. Let's not worry about it. So we did a show, sans drums. And we had to play all these songs that we didn't know anymore because like they were all old songs that would kind of work without drums. We played all these like silly old pop songs in front of Shuriken, who we idolized, who were like amazing. We felt really dumb.
And was that the end of that band?
That was the end of that band. So we decided that was enough. And we started a new band. And that was, and I moved over to drums. I didn't really play guitar again in a band for a few years.
What kind of bands were you going out and seeing? Like, who were your favourite local bands?
Well, those bands like the Rational Academy and, it wasn't the Rational Academy. It was the Autumn Giants. What am I talking about? So it was the Autumn Giants had just broken up. That was Ben's band, and so he hadn't started the Rational Academy yet.
Okay.
The Autumn Giants, and like Iron On and Seaplane and Turnpike, who are the best band in Brisbane ever.
They're still going, aren't they?
They're still going. Yeah, they're still going. They're recording a record with me right now. Right now, as in for the last 3 years. But they're amazing. They're an incredible band. Those bands: Seaplane, Rival Flight, Bloon. They're a little bit later, I suppose. But the Zebras, the Devereaux, Del Pino, all of that sort of stuff. It was really awesome bands. And that was I suppose that was getting into the time of like 610 in the Valley, that time period, the mid 2000s. It's weird that because it was only like a year. It was really only existed for about a year, and it seems like much longer. That was kind of when Rick's was at its height in terms of they used to book really good bands, and everyone used to go there, and like you couldn't get in to Rick's if you weren't early, and you'd go see Nightstick, and it'd be packed. If you didn't, like, they'd play at 10 or whatever, or 11, and the first band at, an hour before that, and if you didn't get in like an hour or two before that, you weren't getting in, or you had to wait in line forever.
And they used to do like midnight shows and early...
Yeah, do the midnight show.
Yeah,
they do all that, and they do the cheese boards on Sunday afternoon, or Saturday afternoons, one of the afternoons in the weekend.
Cheese boards?
Yeah, the cheese board. It's like 2 o'clock on, maybe it was a Saturday. But yeah, it was sort of like a mid-afternoon on the weekend thing. And that was pretty fun. Yeah. But you also had so that was going, and then 610 was going, and the Troubadour was going, and the Rev was going, and there's the Zoo, obviously, and you just go into the Valley, and I'd often see 3 shows in a night. I'd get tickets to the Troubadour, and like pretty much always 610 was one of them, and then maybe one of the Troubadour and the Rev or the Zoo, depending on what was on and how much it cost, and then if there was something good at Rick's, you'd be going in there for free. and you just figure out what the times were for everything, and it'd be like going to a festival every weekend. You know, it was amazing. So, and you can't really do that anymore.
So was this before it became the entertainment precinct?
Yeah, this is 2005 or so.
Yeah,
because I had this was before all the sound problems came.
Yeah,
Sort of just before that. And
sound restrictions.
Yeah, I think all that was like maybe 2007 or so. So that all happened, and yeah, and a lot of the venues sort of like Rick's went to, like you couldn't bring amps, and you had to play really quietly on drums. And they did some shows there with like the radio receivers, like where it was all direct. I think Death Wolf played. You know, Death Wolf, there's a hilarious band. They were like they were pretty cool. Like I'm not giving Death Wolf shit, but just like you look at who was in that band, and like because like from Death Wolf you've got, you know, like Butcher Birds and Slug Guts and like, you know, serious bands, and then you think of Death Wolf and they were in Lycra dancing around and, you know, synth, like, you know, electro clash sort of stuff on stage at Rick's. It was kind of funny. But yeah, they played at the show at Rick's, and it was kind of a protest, and because they didn't have any, you know, like instruments that would go through amps or drums or anything, so they just went directly into the desk, and then they hooked it up to a radio receiver, and everyone came along with like a radio headset, or you were given them, and it was just all through. So if you just walked into the venue, it was just Jimmy K on stage screaming with nothing behind it.
It was like the silent disco thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think they call it the Quiet Ride or something.
And how'd that go as a protest?
I don't know. I think it was an interesting show.
Were you making friends with all these bands at this
I
time?
was eventually, yeah. After I kind of realised that, you know, they're just relatively normal people. You know, they were no less or more normal than I was. And then I kind of realised that it wasn't so foreign, and that I could probably be involved in it somehow. So my band started, you know, getting more into that community and playing at those venues and stuff to an extent. Never got to play at 610. One of my bands was scheduled to play what was going to be the actual sort of farewell to the venue, and the venue didn't last that long. The venue like died a couple of weeks before, so we never got to play.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, and then it kind of semi-resurrected itself a few months later, but it was a bit, I don't know, it wasn't the same. And then eventually it officially closed down, and it reopened as Valley Studios a few years later, which was sort of a completely different thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And they've still got the sign up.
Yeah, it's still for lease if someone wants to do something. I don't think they're interested.
Real estate.
Yeah. I think someone told me that they're not interested in doing anything musical out of it anymore.
No.
And there's like a studio upstairs. There's like a soundproof recording studio with like a control room and everything. Yeah. Like you could actually make it into something pretty good. But I don't know. I imagine it's probably pretty expensive.
And this was around the mid-2000s, and I guess the online communities were starting to become a thing for bands.
Yeah, MySpace.
MySpace
and the time off message board.
Yes.
The time off message board. Is that one of your list of things to talk about? That was a bit of a thing.
It wasn't in particular. Although since you bring it up, one of the bands you mentioned earlier you're a fan of, Iron On, apparently had some controversy on the time off message board at some point.
There was so many controversies on the time off message board. It was kind of infamous. Got threatened to be shut down so many times. Never got shut down. So
was it just like a core group of people just like talking shit about each other's music?
Yeah, there was a lot of them though. There was a lot of people, and it was kind of broad, and it was a real thing. Like it was like, you kind of had clout. The time off message board in a weird way. Like it was actually, I don't know, they could break you. No, but it was kind of, I don't know, it was funny. It was just a bunch of people sort of piss farting around. And
were they like people in bands or just punters? Or?
Most of them. Not all of them
were in bands.
But most of them were in bands. Like all those people. Like a lot of the people, you know, in the bands that I just mentioned, they were all on there, doing their thing. So yeah, that was a funny thing to exist. The time off message board.
And you're also a regular on the Greats message board, Tredbo, at that time.
Yeah, I was.
Mr. Warandy Boy, the member for Beards.
Yeah, I liked posting on the Greats board. There was nice people on there.
There were, and a lot of musicians in bands who would become pretty popular.
There were a couple, yeah.
Bass player from Operator Please.
Yeah, Operator Please were there.
There's people from Little Scout.
I don't think so.
Well, no, Laura Kay, but she wasn't.
Oh, yeah, she was. Yep. Okay.
Yeah,
you're right.
Along with various other colourful characters.
Yeah.
The stripper.
Yeah, I know her still.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, with this
Kind of.
these online communities, did you actually form like real world friendships in the scene?
Yeah, well, I mean, Time Off was people who would have met each other anyway. Although, in some respects, maybe not, because, I mean, just that they're all in a similar community, but maybe not in the sorts of bands that would necessarily play together if they didn't have that link. So, yeah, there were certainly people in there, awesome people who maybe I probably wouldn't have met otherwise. Online. I still do that sort of stuff. I post a lot on the electrical audio board. I don't post it, but I read it a lot, which is Steve Albini's Studios board. So it's full of Chicago musicians and people who are like really into bands that sound like shellac, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Do you think all that was like really important for the bands as a sort of a phenomenon of the mid 2000s for online communities to spring up around them?
I think it's important for I don't know if it's important that they be online communities, but communities are vital, whatever they grow around, whether it be like an online thing like that, which was, I suppose, kind of a thing back in. It's still a thing. There's still those sorts of like noise theory and like a lot of the metal and heavier musics. They have quite vibrant online communities, which I don't really take part in because I'm not so much into that. Not necessarily like those, like heavy music, but not those sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, it might be, it might rise around a venue like 16 or the Hangar or the Waiting Room, or any other venue out there. Real Bad Music, and at Maruka, something like there's all sorts of a record label, Bedroom Suck and Mere Noise and again Lo-Fi, all these sorts of things. So yeah, you get these communities, and I think that's whatever it grows around is less important than the fact that it is there for whatever reason.
You've been in a bunch of bands with Pat Elliott.
Yeah.
And now, 2005, you start your band Mount Augustus.
If you say so, you probably would know better than I can't remember when it started, but if probably.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I would have thought maybe it would have been
earlier.
Yeah, no, actually, that sounds right. Because I think we went for 5 years. And I think we broke up in 2010. Was it? Or was it later than that? 11. So maybe it was 2006 then.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So Mount Augustus, named after the monocline.
Yeah, that's why I talked about it earlier, for those who don't know.
So was this naming after a prominent mountain from your childhood? Was that inspired by Phil Elverum naming Mount Erie?
Yeah, to an extent. And the band Ockerville River, even though that they weren't from anywhere near Ockerville River, but Ockerville River was like a location in a book. I can't remember which book, but it was like it was a literary reference, and because the dude from Ockerville River is very much into his books. I think he has like a dad who's a literary professor, or maybe both parents. Yeah, just this idea of tying yourself to a place and like identifying with your upbringing, I suppose. Maybe not your upbringing, but giving it a sense of history and a sense of this actually comes from a tangible place. It's not just, I'm not just trying to make music that's hip or sounds like a certain thing. Even if I am trying to make music that sounds like a certain thing, and I certainly was in that band. But yeah, to like make it to give it a grounding in reality, I suppose, I suppose to like give it like personal investment. Like this is there's a part of me or of my history just like intrinsic to this band, like it's in the name of the band.
Yeah, it's not just a group that has been formed by any people. It's something that comes from your history.
Yeah, and that was kind of the idea with Mount Augustus, that it was going to be the first time where it was going to be a band that was going to be where it was going to be my band. Like I was going to write all the songs. Because I'd had bands where I was writing, but I wasn't the writer. I was one of a couple. Or it was a band where like we wrote together, or maybe there was one or two of us that wrote, and maybe we wrote songs on our own, but then they came to the band. It was kind of melded into something. And this band was going to be my band, where I sort of wrote the songs and brought them in as like, this is the song, and then we'd come up with a thing for it to play, so it could be played as a band, but they were my songs, and if people came and went, that was okay. Like people weren't locked into the band. If they didn't want to do it anymore, there was no obligation.
And people certainly did come and go to Mount
Yeah, there
Augustus.
was lots of people in Mount Augustus. They all got in much more successful bands than Mount Augustus ever was.
Yes, you had members of Little Scout, Line Island,
John Still Singers.
Velociraptor by the end.
Yeah, Velociraptor, yep, in the end.
But so was Dan Denton there from the start as your trusted bass
No,
player?
so Dan played bass, and Dan was in the second iteration of Mount Augustus. So the first iteration was Pat Elliott, who we keep talking about Pat, but Pat went on to do Little Scout, and we were in heaps of bands together. And Mel Tickle from Little Scout, and Pat McDermott, who ended up playing bass in John Still Singers for a while. And so the four of us had this version of the band, and then Mel and Pat decided that they didn't want to do it anymore. And Dan joined on bass, and I taught him how to play saw. And he was there from then on. He was the bass player in Mount Augustus. So he was there for 4 of the 5 years, and Pat was there for about 3 or 4 of the 5 years. So he was there from the start, and then he left a bit before the end, so about a year before the end.
So you said that this was going to be your band for the first time. So did you have a really clear vision when you set out of what sort of kind of music you wanted to play?
I just kind of wanted it to be folk music, like acoustic, I guess. At first it was acoustic, and then later on it went a bit electric, like from listening to bands like Low and the Drones and
because it
Blue
started
Bottle
off,
Kiss and stuff.
the first 2 EPs are sort of more a bit Elliott Smith.
Yeah, it started off like
influenced.
Elliott Smith, Nutrimilk Hotel, Ockerville River, all that sort of stuff. Really kind of folky, Nick Drake even. And then at some point, it got a bit louder. I think it was basically when Pat stopped playing in the band regularly, because he used to play keyboards and mandolin and accordion and stuff. And when he stopped being available because he was in Little Scout, and Little Scout was getting busy, and we played in a bunch of other bands as well. So we had like 4 bands, and 3 of them were together. And I was playing in Little Scout as well. So I was playing drums for Little Scout for about the first year or so of that band. And so he just decided that he wasn't necessarily going to be available all the time, and so to sort of fill up the space a little bit, we just started playing electric a bit more often.
And so at this point you were in a few bands, including several with Pat. You were in Fickle Beasts and Buildings Melt.
Yep, so Fickle Beasts. And we had a band in between Forever Green and Fickle Beasts, which is called Captain Woot and the Slighted Man. And we used to get a lot of shit for that name, probably deservedly. But I still maintain I still like it as a band name because it's just ridiculous.
Was Woot spelt
I can't
with
imagine
zeros?
anyone taking... Sorry?
Was Woot spelt with zeros?
Yes, it was. Absolutely. Couldn't be spelt any other way. We had that band. And then that band broke up, and we decided to do Fickle Beast. And Fickle Beast was sort of a bit more... quite heavily influenced by Sonic Youth and Polvo and Deerhoof and bands like that. And
that was just you two as a 2-piece.
yeah,
wasn't it?
so that was the first time I did a 2-piece.
And so you're on drums and vocals, and Pat was on guitar?
Yeah, and he did some vocals as well. And so we're doing that, and Mount Augustus, and there was Little Scout, which was more... So Little Scout was kind of Pat's Mount Augustus, where Mel was writing in that as well. And that's why I didn't join that band full time, because Pat asked me to, and I sort of went, that's your band. We play in all these bands together. I think it'd be good for you to play with people who aren't me for a while. And of course, that band was way more successful than any of my bands had been up until that point. And then we also played in another band together called Buildings Melt, which was kind of a post-rock band. And that was with a friend of ours called Adrian, who later on played in Ghost Notes and does Rusted Satellites, the radio show on Triple Z. And then Pat left that band pretty much at the same time as Mount Augustus, and we had a friend, Dan Wright, who you might know as Monster, the instrumental hip-hop artist, and he joined and took Pat's place in that band.
So you were playing in a lot of bands at this time, which the mid to late 2000s.
Yeah.
I think we are chronologically. Is it fair to say that Mount Augustus was always sort of your flagship band in terms of projects that you had?
It was the one, I guess it was the one I had the most responsibility in, because if I wasn't going to do stuff, then it wasn't going to get done. The other bands had other people to take the load of, you know, just keeping the band running and keeping the band writing music. Whereas, yeah, if I didn't do things in Mount Augustus, then nothing got done. But I don't necessarily if it was like it got any more of my attention than any other band.
Did you have ambitions for the band?
A little bit, I suppose. As much as any band, you know, it'd be nice to get some radio play and maybe tour a bit. And we did both of those things, I guess. Like, we got played on the radio and we did tour.
You got some good supports with Mount Erie, Holly Throsby.
Yeah, I mean, somehow we got a couple of nice ones. But I was really only still figuring out how to do that stuff. Like, to get your songs on, get your songs on the radio and do a tour that's actually worthwhile and play with good bands and play a good venue and get people to come. So yeah, I mean, sort of it went along. It went along for a long time, and eventually I just decided I didn't want to do it anymore as a band.
Was it hard having people come and go a lot, especially drummers? So I think you had the October Curse for a long time.
Yeah, all of our drummers used to quit every October. It was like 4 Octobers in a row. Our drummer quit. I don't think we made it to the last one because I think I pulled the plug on the band before that.
Before October, yeah.
Yeah. So
was that a factor in how you sort of started to get sick of?
Yeah, it was sort of two things. Like, one was, I was like, it got to be a bit of a drag having to get a new drummer, because drummers are hard to get. It's hard to get a new drummer into a band. There's a lot, like, drummers are crucial. You need a good drummer, and you need the drummer to, like, know how it all goes, because that's the push and pull of the band. That's the drive. If you don't have a good drummer, then it's hard in a lot of, not all music, but in a lot of music, in the music we were playing. So there was that. I was sort of sick of that, and I could sort of see the writing on the wall that the other band members were sort of, you know, they didn't have, like, it was Jeremy. Jeremy was the last drummer in the band, and he was in Velociraptor and Running Guns and Tiger Beams and a million bands, and it was like, this is not going to last. It's like he's just doesn't have time for all this stuff. You know, so, and it was that, and also I kind of got sick of it being the band where I write everything and do everything, and I kind of wanted to be more of a band, like, where we would work on things together. And I kind of floated that idea to the rest of the members, and they weren't really into the idea, which I was surprised by. And it kind of made me think, oh well, why have a band then?
They just like being your sidemen.
Yeah, and I'd played a few solo shows at that point and realised that I quite liked it. It was quite fun. And I could just play the same songs pretty much, but I had a lot more freedom to just push and pull and play them how I wanted to. I didn't have to worry about the rest of the band playing a song, like, a lot faster than I felt like it maybe should have been, or whatever, forgetting. If I forgot the second verse, that's my own fault. So yeah, I just decided, like, to take it and do it solo, because I had other bands, like and being, like, playing solo is something I'd never done. Like, even in Mount Augustus, I didn't really do many solo shows. So yeah, I sort of thought that sounded like something that could be fun. And
you had a particularly bad gig right at the end, I believe, with Mount Augustus.
Oh yeah, we had a show and it went pretty pear-shaped, and we were trying to play a few new songs that we'd played before, but we hadn't rehearsed because people were too busy and we hadn't got our asses into gear to get it organised. And I just remember, like, that we were playing this song, and I was waiting for one of the other band members to kick into the next section. So we were playing the intro, and they sort of kick it into the next bit, and it just never. And so we just kept playing the intro for like 2 minutes, and I was just, like, on stage, like, this is painful. So I stopped playing. I just went up to the mic. I was like, "Thanks. That's the last Mount Augusta show." I just kind of made the decision right then on stage.
On the spot.
Pretty much. I kind of had been thinking about it for a while anyway. I was like, oh, maybe this will be the last one, or maybe we'll have one more to sort of like say goodbye, and we'll finish these recordings and stuff. And it was so bad that I was just, like, on stage. I was just like, yeah, that's it. I don't want to do this anymore. Fuck this. I think it was literally that. Like, I think I literally said that. It was something pretty close to that. And put my guitar down and walked out.
That's pretty dramatic. How did Dan and Jeremy
Dan was not
that?
happy. Jeremy was just concerned. He was just like, he just wanted to know that I was okay. But Dan was like, what the hell just happened? So, yeah. But he forgave me.
You did release 2 EPs and an album with Mount Augustus, the album which was a long time coming.
It was.
A long time recording, but it finally came out in 2010. But when you broke up in 2011, you'd started recording a follow-up, I believe?
Yeah, we sort of had, I don't know, most of it kind of done. Most of it written and partially recorded. Some of that survived and became Saint Augustus. So when I broke up Mount Augustus, I just changed one letter and it became Saint Augustus. Because that was a nickname that one of the old drummers gave to me.
Saint Augustine?
He used to call me Saint Augustine. So I sort of figured that was, still kind of kept the theme going. And it was confusing for a while. A lot of people didn't know what was going on. But yeah, that's what happened to that one.
So Mount Augustus lasted, 6 years in the end? 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, 5 years, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Did you ever feel that you were sort of starting to get a following at all, or?
Well, I always felt, I felt like we'd sort of start building, we'd play more shows, play better shows, we'd actually start getting to be a good band, and then the October curse would come, and I'd lose a drummer, and I'd lose all my motivation, and I wouldn't start looking for a replacement for a few months, and then it'd take a few months, so then, you'd lose, 3 to 6 months of just nothing. And then you'd feel like you're starting from scratch, and then you'd build it up over the sort of next 6 to 9 months, and you sort of get to sort of feeling like it's kind of working again, it's kind of gelling again. The songs have, because you have to change the songs to fit the new people, and it's good in a way because like you get new people brings new things to the music, and it sounds it can be really really good, but you kind of have to work on it. There's that period of flux in the middle where it doesn't sound very good or sounds like some of it's working and some of it's not, and so we just kept having to get through that, and every time we'd get through it and it'd sort of start being good, and then we'd have to go through it all again. And after it happened a bunch of times, I stopped trying. Like not so much stopped trying, but stopped worrying about it so much. I think when you start in music, you've kind of got these ideas about what's achievable or what's what you think you should be able to do, and then later as you go along, you sort of, for one thing, you kind of realize how much effort goes into just like even a small amount of success in that sort of stuff, and you kind of realize, okay, that's actually and also just how much luck, like you just someone you need the right confluence of factors, and it can happen, and if it doesn't happen, even if Turnpike aren't exactly household names, and they're amazing.
But they've had longevity. They have. Because they have a hardcore of followers.
They do, yeah. And they just, and they also don't really care. Yeah. In a way. Like they care a lot. And they care in the ways that you need to care. Like they want to make their band as awesome as it can be. And they're very successful because their band's really awesome.
But on another level, do you think it's important to not care about other things?
Well, that was kind of the thing that I started having, like I started to feel. I started to feel like those things are less important to me now, and I just want to have fun. I just want to enjoy myself and make music that I really enjoy. Not that I didn't enjoy it, but I think sometimes with Mount Augustus, like I felt pulled in too many directions with it, and so I wasn't enjoying it as much. So I decided to pull the pin and to do something that seemed to be more enjoyable, which was to play solo. And as I said, like I still had, like I've pretty much always been in at least 3 bands at any one point in time. So I had other bands where I was getting that band camaraderie and collaboration and all that sort of thing. So I didn't need it in Mount Augustus. If it wasn't there anyway, then why worry about it? So yeah, it wasn't like I always thought that there'd be a lot more hand wringing because it went for a long time and it was my band. And then when the time came, it was just felt like the right thing to do. It felt very natural. I mean, maybe the actual act of of ending the band was a little bit more dramatic than what I was intending it to be, happening on stage as it did. But I didn't afterwards feel particularly sad about it, which is, I think, is a good indication. Maybe it had even gone on too long. Maybe it should have already finished up. I don't know. Although the last year was kind of good.
So after you ended Mount Augustus, at this point were you playing in Ghost Notes yet?
Yes, I was playing in Ghost Notes.
And so they're a band that formed out of the ashes of Mass Migration?
Yeah, Mass Migration and Building Smelt. So Building Smelt was one band that I was in with Adrian. And then Mass Migration had Jamie and Owen, and they'd had Luke play trumpet with them at some shows. Yeah, when those two bands both broke up at a similar time, they decided to make some music together without me at first. It was just a 4-piece. So it was Adrian, Luke, Owen, and Jamie.
You recorded their first EP and you played drums on that, but you weren't actually a member at that point?
Yeah, well, because I'd recorded the Mass Migration EP.
Oh, yeah.
So I knew them through that. And so when it came to record, and I'd recorded with Adrian through Building Smelt. We did our own album. And so, yeah, when Ghost Notes wanted to record an EP, they came to me. And so I recorded it, and then sort of last minute we decided to put drums on 2 of the songs. I just sort of played drums over the top of songs that were already finished. And then they started playing shows, and they were they sort of said, well, if we're going to play, there's drums on these songs, do you want to come play drums on those couple of songs? And I ended up learning drums on some of the other songs, and then we just started writing new music, and all of a sudden I was in the band.
What attracted you to Ghost Notes when they asked you to drum for them?
Well, when they came in to record, and this is sort of after I'd already recorded Little Scout and DJ and No Anchor and probably some Running Guns and stuff. So I'd done some records that I really liked. And I just thought that their record was just amazing. I thought their band was incredible. I was just super excited about it, just super excited to be involved. And these people who were friends of mine and I'd played with and been involved with musically. So, it was kind of a no-brainer that if they wanted me to be involved in any way that I would do it. Because I'd sort of seen them, when we started recording it, I'd seen them play one show, which I think was maybe the only show they played. Maybe they played one other. And the first show, it was a bit of a mess. They weren't quite on it yet. As it's often the case at a first show. The second show was better, but I can't remember if that was before or after the record. It might have been after, or maybe even in the middle or something. But in any case, like when we actually came in to record, like they'd obviously really been practicing, and they had those songs down, and they were just worked over. They were really amazing, I thought. And I was just like really, really excited that whole weekend of recording, and then through the mixing and overdubs over the next few weeks. I just kind of sort of fell into the band, but I was quite happy about that.
And so it's a bit of a mix of approaches to music in Ghost Notes. I think you've said that Jamie and Luke are really practiced musicians, whereas you and Owen and Simon are a bit more idiosyncratic.
Yeah, to an extent. Like we definitely... I mean, everyone has their elements, like, they've all got their polished and their unpolished elements. So, while Jamie and Luke might know a little bit more of the technique behind what they're doing, they can still forget that when they need to. When it suits the music, they're not bound to it. And Owen and Simon and I, know our little bits here and there that we're able to use. I think it's a really good band. I'm really proud of what we've done in that band so far. Yeah. And that band kind of formed, well, maybe not formed, but it became fairly clear fairly early on that we wanted to be a substantial band, not necessarily in terms of popularity, but like we wanted to be around for a while, and we wanted to have a body of work. We wanted, and you could go through and see a progression, but also see like the commonalities between it, and sort of get a real sense of how the band worked just by listening to it and seeing it at work over a period of time. and seeing the growth in the musicians and the personalities. And so far that's coming true. I mean, we're about to put out our second full-length record, and we've actually pretty much finished recording the third one for after that. So, and at the moment we've got like 80 minutes of recorded, released studio music. We're about to put out another 80 minutes. You know, that's more than a lot of bands. It's more than most bands, really, when you think about it. Yeah, that's kind of a goal fulfilled in a sense. One of many, though. You just keep making more.
And so in some ways with Ghost Notes, you had a pretty quiet 2012, and yet this is when you recorded both albums, isn't it? Yeah,
we did. We in 2011, we played a few shows in 2011. We went on tour. We put out our album, a full-length album, and we were kind of a hit and miss live band. We could be really good, but some nights we were really just didn't happen, and it was kind of painful to get through. And so towards the end of 2011, we sort of decided, right, well, next year we're gonna sort of cut out the live stuff. And I think we were thinking of the band Bloon when we did that. We were like a post-rock band from like the mid to late 2000s who played sporadically, and they'd sort of appear once every like year or so, and do like 2 or 3 shows, and then just disappear for another year. And they were all, but when they came out, they were just like impeccable. But sort of playing this fairly classical kind of post-rock sort of stuff. That was probably really the only way we were influenced by Bloon, because we didn't, although we are kind of post-rock in a sense, like we play instrumental music that often has crescendos and is kind of dramatic and cinematic, I suppose. We don't like sounding like Mogwai or Explosions in the Sky or anything like that.
And you take a lot of other influences like jazz and Morricone and
a lot of Morricone.
Drone.
Like Morricone is probably the single biggest influence. Morricone and the Dirty Three, like those two, and also like jazz like Miles Davis and all sorts of jazz. Like Luke is really into his jazz, and also like Talk and Blue Bottle Kiss. They're like Blue Bottle Kiss are a massive influence on Ghost Notes. In fact, of all the bands that we take influence from, like Mogwai and Sia Rose and that are like don't really get a look in. Although I like Sia Rose, and Owen's quite a big Mogwai fan, but Owen hates Sia Rose, and he hates Godspeed You Black Emperor. So if we don't want him to play something, we'll just tell him it sounds like Sia Rose, and he instantly won't play it anymore.
And you yourself seem to take a bit from Jim White, drummer from the Dirty Three.
Yeah, Jim White and Greg Saunier from Deerhoof. And it's funny because you would think my other band at the moment, or my other main band, Tiny Spiders, would be
the
Deerhoof thing, and in songwriting it is. But the drumming is actually only partially, because it's actually more difficult because we're not Deerhoof, we're a 2-piece, and it's difficult to have the freeness in a 2-piece that Deerhoof has. So I'm not actually able to do as much of like the free drumming. But in Ghost Notes, it's a 5-piece, and so I can just go off and do what I want on drums. I don't have to actually stay in the meter of the song. I don't have to stay on beat. I can just, the rest of the band are used to it by now, that like they don't freak out when I stop playing the beat and I go off and do something else, and they know, all right, Cam's doing his thing, I'll keep going, and I'll stop getting the rhythm from Cam and I'll get it from Owen now, or someone else. So yeah, in a drumming sense, Ghost Notes is the perfect band. I get to do everything that I want to do in drums in Ghost Notes. Like I get to do the really free, crazy stuff. I get to do the just textural kind of pattering and scraping stuff. I get to play really loud sometimes. I get to play like really rigid kind of krautrock beats and stuff. I get to do everything. It's really great in that respect.
You've said of Ghost Notes, we definitely think of ourselves as a rock band.
In a sense.
At heart. So what exactly does rock and roll mean to you, Cam Smith? I'm sorry, I just watched Almost Famous again last night.
Yeah, it's just energy, I guess rock and roll is putting an like energy out there that has an authenticity in terms of like just being like honest. Like it's not necessarily like, to me it's not about posturing. For a lot of people it is. For a lot of people, like part of what goes along with rock and roll is, or rock music, if you want to make a differentiation between the two, is like, you know, the larger than lifeness. And I suppose I've never really been into that, even back in the day of, like, you know, being into Oasis. You know, that was why when I came across the Foo Fighters, it appealed to me more, because even though Dave Grohl is a massive personality, he's not
trying to be anyone else.
No, he's just himself.
Whereas
I'm Dave Grohl.
Liam Gallagher is trying to be
exactly.
Johnny Rotten or John Lennon.
Yeah, he's trying to be this larger than life character. You know, and then from then on, most of the music, not all of it. I mean, if you're going to listen to Smashing Pumpkins, you've got to have a little bit of forgiveness for over the top personalities and ego. But yeah, the further along I've gone, the less I've cared about that, and the more it's turned me off, and the more I'm into just authentic expressions, you know. And people often say, like, you know, with the recording stuff, and it kind of links into this, like, people say, oh, well, you work with so many bands and surely some of them are terrible, you know, you just can't stand it. It's like, well, maybe they are, I don't know, but I'm not thinking of that. All I'm thinking of is the people that I'm working, and because you're in close proximity with them, working on something that they've put a lot of time and effort into, and you're trying to make sure you don't drop the ball for them. You're trying to, like, put them in a light that is flattering, and it's the light that they want to be put forward in. And so you're not thinking about whether or not you like the music. You don't care. You just want to not let them down. You're fighting for them, and you're trying to get that personality to come through. Like, you want that music to be a representation of those people that are working on it and have put all this time and effort into it. And that's the thing, like, and because so many people, like, are out there and who say, oh, you know, they're just making the sort of music that's cool, and, you know, they don't really care. And, well, you know, maybe they are making the music that's cool. You know, maybe, I guess to an extent, that's certain bands, that's indisputable, but it doesn't mean that they don't really mean it, because it's a lot of time to put into something that you don't really mean. A lot of energy. I don't know that there are many people who can do that, you know, not for any length of time. So I sort of working as a recording engineer has really changed my perspective. And I was always like, there's too much effort to put into, like,
into hating something.
Yeah, I was never really too bothered with it. It's like, fine, I don't like it, whatever. You know, maybe when I'm drunk I might make fun of it a bit, but I don't really mean anything bad by it.
You said that music doesn't offend you, but only people. Yeah,
I reckon that's a pretty good summation. It's like, yeah, music, I'm not offended by, I'm only offended by music that, like, it really is a commercial thing, and the people performing and writing it, there isn't that personal thing, and that the personality has been actually removed because it's purely a financial thing.
It's just,
which isn't to say that all popular music is like that. I'm pretty, like, I don't listen to her music, but I'm pretty sure Adele is pretty true to herself, and I'm sure I'm sure Lady Gaga is, actually. I don't reckon she's. I'm sure there's lots of consideration of financial stuff, but I think there's actually also a lot of, you know, herself in that. And, you know, I don't go out of my way to hear any of that stuff, but I think you can kind of tell a little bit when there's a degree of themselves being put into it. But I think certainly when you're talking about little local bands, even like popular local bands who, you know, maybe get to open the small stages at Big Day Out or something, I think it's such a waste of time to get into second guessing why they do it, and if they're worthy of, you know, as the same sort of consideration. I mean, sure, if you don't like it, then you don't like it, you don't listen to it, you know, but I think to get all sort of snarky about it is just counterproductive to everyone. So I try not to get involved in it too much. Yeah, so that kind of relates back to what we were talking about before somehow.
So the other main band that you're in at the moment is Tiny Spiders.
Yeah.
And that originally started in 2010. It was originally supposed to be a three-piece with Ian Rogers from No
Yeah, so this was after the other band Fickle Beasts had broken up. that was my last band with Pat Elliott, and after that he's just done Little Scout from now on, or from then on rather. So that kind of left me with just Mount Augustus and Building Smelt. It was just those two, wasn't it?
Was it Ghost Notes yet?
And I guess, well, or either. So Mount Augustus and either Ghost Notes or Building Smelt. Probably would have been Ghost Notes, I suppose. So I didn't really have like a loud band, just a fun, loud, get really sweaty, make some noise band. And I just wanted one. And Ian had been talking about wanting to start just sort of something, because he was doing No Anchor. So Iron On had finished and he'd started No Anchor, and we'd become friends through recording, because I didn't know Ian before recording No Anchor. I knew Alex, the drummer. And so I sort of I saw them play, I think it was their second show, and I thought they were amazing. And I just went up to Alex and said, look, I've started recording bands, and if you guys want to come in, you can record, and you don't have to pay, you don't have to give me any money or anything like that. I just really like to record you. And it just sort of ended up being, like, it was just supposed to be a weekend of recording, just see what came out, and in the end, that was the first album. So anyway, I'd sort of known Ian since then, and he wanted to do a fun sort of punk pop band. He wanted to make a band that's kind of like the Thermals, and like Superchunk. I guess he'd already done a band that's kind of like Superchunk.
Was he missing Iron On a bit?
I think he was just missing like just playing pop songs a little bit, yeah. So he wanted to start this band, and I knew Inez. She was in Mass Migration with Jamie and Owen, who did Ghost Notes with me now, and I knew that she was always more into like heavier, punkier music than Mass Migration, although she liked lots of music. And she played bass because Ian wanted to play guitar and I played drums. So we decided to get together, and we did, and it was terrible because none of us wanted to take charge. And Ian was sort of still trying to figure, he hadn't played guitar for a while, so he was trying to figure his way around guitar. And Inez was like, because we both love No Anchor, and so like she didn't want to suggest any riffs or anything. I don't know if she had anything to suggest, and I had a few, but I was like, I'm playing drums, I don't really want to suggest riffs. And because I just, Fickle Beast had finished, and the thing with Fickle Beast was it was kind of hard for me to write riffs for that band because I played guitar so differently from Pat, and it often just didn't translate. So I sort of wrote in other ways in that band, and so I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to give my like, oh, hey, I've got all these riffs we should play. So we just jammed, and it just wasn't very good. And I think we all knew it wasn't very good. What we did, we were like quite explicit about it, but we liked playing with each other, and we were obviously good friends. So we decided to give it another go a couple of weeks later. But last minute, Ian couldn't make it. Something came up. So Nez and I was like, let's just get together anyway. So then I kind of had to go, well, here are my riffs. Here are my riffs. Let me show you them. And we just sort of started playing and doing these riffs. And we were kind of like, oh, maybe we should organize another one. Maybe we should just do it without Ian. Just for now. And we'll see how it goes. And we did another one. And I think by the end of that we had like a couple of songs that were like pretty much done. Like I think I even had vocals. We had like, I don't know, 3 or 4 songs already, and it like sounded good. And so we just kind of went, maybe this is a band. Maybe it's just the two of us. So
how did Ian take that?
Pretty well, I think. I think he was okay with it. I don't think he was pretty busy. He had stuff on. He was like doing his PhD and stuff at the time. So we just sort of kept going. And originally it was supposed to be, because initially was playing bass, and we were just going to continue. It was going to be bass and drums. We were a little bit worried about the whole No Anchor Lightning Bolt ripoff thing, but we just kept going. But then eventually we rehearsed one time, and we forgot our bass. We only had a guitar, so we did it on guitar, and we kind of went, yeah, it sounds better when it's guitar.
And there was a particular gig you played in Melbourne where you sort of settled your sound.
Yeah, well, after we'd sort of been playing for about a year or so, we went down to Melbourne, and we organised this gig with some friends of mine, and we played at a place called Irene Community Warehouse in Brunswick, I'm pretty sure. And we were borrowing gear, and they had this really loud, bassy guitar amp. Or maybe it was actually a bass amp, I'm not sure. But it was really thick sounding and really kind of nasty. and we played the show, and it was really good. We played like, kind of all came together really nicely, and then they were kind of like, oh, okay, maybe we should like try and get like really big amps and make it really, really thick and bassy. So we got the octave pedal, and we started sort of setting all that up so we could get this really big fuzzy guitar sound, and that was kind of when it all started to gel and started to become, what it is now. Yeah, but that was the thing, because we were recording pretty much from the get-go, but it kept changing because we kept sort of tweaking what the band was, and like sonically, and also just in the sort of the energy of the band. And so we'd have to keep going back and changing what we'd recorded, because it wasn't necessarily what we sounded like anymore.
And that eventually became the album.
Yeah, pretty much I don't think there was anything we re-recorded. I think pretty much everything on that album is like the first recording of the song.
So what's in the future for Tiny Spiders now?
We're not playing as live as much lately, kind of by design, and we're doing a lot of writing. We're all really busy. I mean, when we were doing that album, and Nez was in two other bands, Feathers and Pastel Blaze. And Feathers was like a pretty busy band, like a pretty popular band, and Pastel Blaze was kind of her band. Like she wrote the guitar riffs, at least. I'm not sure how much more, but like she sort of wrote the nucleus of the songs that the rest of them build around, from what I have been told. So, and then now those two bands are kind of gone now. Pastel Blaze have just essentially broken up for the time being. Feathers are pretty much done, but she plays in a band called Rocky Music with Donnie, her partner, who plays in No Anchor, and some other friends of ours. So yeah, we're all really busy. I'm kind of playing kind of 6 bands at the moment, to varying extents.
You've just started a new one with Joel Saunders, Spirit Bunny?
Called Spirit Bunny, which is an interesting one. Joel and Kate from Feet Teeth. It's kind of hip hop, but not really.
And this sounds like something that's really different for you.
Yeah, it's really constraining, because I'm playing like, I've got like a drum pad. I've got like acoustic drums, but just like a basic setup, just like ride, kick, and a snare, which is pretty much what I play in Tiny Spiders these days, except I usually have a floor tom as well, but I don't really play hi-hats or any other cymbals, and I don't have any rack toms or anything, and sometimes I don't have the floor tom either. So I've got those, and then I've got this drum pad, and I set up loops on the drum pad, and then I've got to play along with them, and those guys, the guys in Spirit Bunny, it's kind of weird because they're predominantly improv musicians. They don't really play, or they haven't for a fair while played in like a band with like songs that have set sections, which means that like we're all feeling like far more constrained than normal, because I'm constrained with like these loops and these rhythms and stuff, and they're constrained just within songs, and also these instruments that that they're sort of discovering, and the ways that they're playing. So it's really, it's an interesting band, and if it doesn't work, and we played our first show a couple of weeks ago, and it was a disaster. It was really like about as bad as I've ever felt on stage. Like I just couldn't wait. We didn't finish the set, and I just couldn't wait to get out of there. It was really a real bummer. Because we were really excited.
Have you got any more gigs coming up?
No, I've said no to a couple that we've been offered.
Oh.
Although I legitimately couldn't play them. I was busy. There were like nights where I've got stuff on, like Tiny Spiders shows, and I think one was on a Tiny Spiders show and one was on a Ghost Note show. So I legitimately couldn't do them.
Have you recorded anything?
Yeah, we have, because we've that's how we've been learning the songs, is we record them on a cassette 4-track. And that's kind of been our thing. And because we've been doing the same thing in Tiny Spiders lately too, just recording all the songs on cassette 4-track, and then we just like dump it onto the computer and just do a vocal over the top on the computer. And Spirit Bunny's kind of doing the same thing. It's a good way to work. I really like it. Simple, just don't have to worry about so much. Just like one mic on the drums, maybe another mic on the kick, one mic on the bass amp, one mic on the guitar amp, into the tape machine, and just put everything so it sounds nice, and you're done. Walk home, go home.
So Spirit Bunny's sort of a very different project musically from pretty much everything you've done before, but do you think there has been much overlap between your past projects? Like, say, Fickle Beasts as a two-piece has a couple of similarities with Tiny Spiders, maybe? Or
Yeah,
Buildings
well,
with
I
Ghost
sort of
Notes?
felt like Captain Woot went to Fickle Beasts, and then Fickle Beasts went into Tiny Spiders. And there's an element of Tiny Spiders going into Spirit Bunny as well. And there's Spirit Bunny, and there's also bits of Ghost Notes going into Spirit Bunny, and there's also things that I haven't. And each time there's also new things that you like want to try that you're adding in there. Because I remember thinking like there are two songs on the Tiny Spiders album
That are co-writes with Pat.
Well, yeah, they're co-writes insofar as they are built around this idea of a riff. And the weird thing is, like, they were Fickle Beast riffs, but they were Fickle Beast riffs that I hadn't heard in 2 years. There's no recordings of them. And they only existed in my memory, and my memory was all jumbled. So they only vaguely sound like the Fickle Beast riffs. There's one of the songs is a song called Harsh Mistress, which is in like it's in like 14 measures to the bar or something. It's not in a normal 4/4 or 6/4 kind of beat. And I don't think that was the case originally. I think it was more normal. So yeah, they've kind of been morphed just by my poor memory and my poor guitar skills in comparison to Pat to be kind of a completely new riff, and then like the rest of the song built around it. But they were still kind of based on a riff that was written with Pat. It's only fair that he gets the credit for it. And that was what kind of made it cool, like, because it wasn't just necessarily recycling a riff. It was kind of recycling a riff, but there was this whole other layer of abstraction on top of it, which made it kind of fun and less just feeling like digging up the grave of an old band.
Moving beyond bands now, you've had a lot of other music-related projects over the years. Around, I think, 2007, you started a blog called Before Hollywood.
Yeah, something around that time. Went for about 3 years, so probably sounds about right, yeah.
And so this was mainly gig reviews and gig guide listings for local bands?
Yeah, and album or record reviews, yeah.
So what was like the idea, what was the impetus for that project?
Well, this other guy that I knew from online, he wanted to start a blog. It was kind of his idea, and he invited me to start it with him. And I kind of had been thinking about doing it anyway, because I just felt like the articles and reviews that were written about local bands were pretty slight. There wasn't really anything on the internet yet that was sort of talking about local bands in Brisbane bands in sort of an in-depth way. And I was really like looking at websites like Mess and Noise, I suppose, as inspiration. Because they were a website, but they were also a print magazine at that time. Like things like local street press just don't have the ability to do that. It doesn't really work in the format.
Did you ever consider writing for street press, for Rave or Time Off?
A little bit, yeah, I did consider. And I had considered since then, but I've never really gotten around to it. So yeah, I decided to start writing, and I just wanted to write more in-depth reviews and things that just sort of, just looked a little bit deeper and made connections between local bands. Like to sort of see this band is from a community that has these other bands, and you can hear it in these ways, or you can see where they're influencing each other.
So was it really about promoting the Brisbane scene, or was it also about a creative project for yourself, doing that kind of writing?
I suppose it was mostly about, I suppose, promotion in a sense. Just not even really promotion, just sort of giving it the genuine thought that I felt like it deserved, like thoughtful writing and informed writing, like bands, like writers who knew where the bands were coming from. And so that was the idea. So we did that for a few years, and we decided to put out a compilation CD, which ended up being 3 CDs and 42 bands worth of local music, which we put out. And
this was the Stranded compilation?
Stranded, yeah, which I thought was maybe not a great name again. But
a bit on the nose?
It was fine, it's just a bit overused for Brisbane music.
You didn't think Before Hollywood was a bit on the nose?
Yeah, but Before Hollywood's not quite as overused as Stranded.
Possibly not.
There's so many things that are called, Brisbane music things are called Stranded. But anyway, it was called Stranded. And then a little while through, Luke moved to China, and so stopped contributing, and I kept it going just on my own for, I don't know, another year or so. And then eventually I stopped, mostly because I was getting into the recording thing, and it just kind of became awkward to write about musicians that I wanted to come in and record with me. Not that I had this thing of like, if I just didn't have anything like constructive to say, then I didn't write about it. If I just didn't like it, there's no point. But if I liked it, I had to at least like something about it, or at least sort of respect it, even if I wrote things that were sometimes critical. Because I remember talking to, I wrote a review of Axon, this Axon record, and it was the second EP that they did, and it wasn't completely glowing, and I think Tom and Ian, maybe when they first read it, were a little bit like, what the hell? What does Cam think he's saying?
Was there blowback from that in a town as
No, it was
Brisbane?
fine. Like, because they were kind of like, I think they thought about it for a little bit and were like, okay, well, actually, maybe he's got a point. And, yeah, maybe we should actually think about whether maybe he's actually saying something of worth, or even if he's not, even if we disagree with it, he's not being mean. He's just sort of saying, I think they do this well, and I think this stuff that they're doing is not so good. I think they should do more of this that they do really well, which is that's pretty much what I was saying in the review, because it was just this EP and like it was two Axon songs and then 2 solo songs each, and I thought the solo songs were better than the Axon songs, and and I think I said something like that. I thought their drum programming sounded a bit amateurish. That was my criticism, and I think Ian agreed, and I think that might have been one of the reasons why he sort of left the band. I don't know. I'm putting words in his mouth. I don't know what the reasons were, but anyway, he left a few months later.
So when you got that kind of reaction from something that you had written, how'd that make you feel?
Well, I was fine with it because because I was happy. Like, I was happy that I could write something that about my friends' bands, or about bands I knew, that I wasn't just saying, oh, it's awesome because they're friends of mine, and that at the same time that I could, while still being, I thought it was still a positive review, but it wasn't completely positive. That people, friends of mine, I could say critical things about their music and not necessarily have it affect my everyday relationship with them, which was nice to see. And I think people should realize that if people can't take it, as long as the criticism is just like, if you go to the effort of justifying what you're saying, and you're not just hacking into them gleefully, you're doing it with purpose. I think people can respect that and take the criticism. And if they can't, then they're probably douchebags that you don't want to hang out with. So that's it's pretty much that's my philosophy on a lot of this stuff. You just be honest, but be thoughtful. With that sort of stuff, and being in a band and booking shows and recording bands and everything with it. That's what you got to do.
Have you thought any more about writing music criticism since before Hollywood?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a few times. I was thinking about it when I heard like that Time Off was sort of struggling, apparently, to get people to review local shows, just because of changes with Street Press Australia. Because I knew some of the people who were reviewing local shows, and they were like, I suppose, a little bit upset that they were the only ones doing it, and they felt a little bit let down by the greater community, that no one else had stepped forward, and like there were all of these really great local shows that are going unreviewed, and because they can only do so much. They're people with actual jobs and families and stuff like that. So it's really great that they go out and do anything at all, especially for small local shows. And it's really to be commended, and especially to be and it's very, by necessity, kind of a restricting format. Like, you've only got a few hundred words to play with, and you've got to be pretty concise. So yeah, I had considered it.
Did Everett True approach you to write for Collapseboard?
Yeah, I have written a few things for Collapseboard.
You did?
Not reviews as such, but I've written some articles. I wrote one called the Rant in B Minor, which which had a bit of I don't know, got around the internet a little bit. It was basically just saying, it was about the whole the cultural cringe of Brisbane, even more so than Australia. Like Brisbane people sort of putting it down and moving out and moving to Melbourne, and this idea that Brisbane is some backwater community with no cultural worth to talk of, and I just found that to be a load of crap. And I wrote this big article about how I thought it was completely untrue and it's just a cop out, and there's heaps going on, but there's a lot of people who I guess just want things to be handed to them, or who just want to complain. It doesn't matter what is actually put in front of them, they're still gonna have a whinge about how there's nothing, and they're the sort of people who do well in Melbourne, because Melbourne has so many things like right there. You don't have to put in any effort. It's right there in front of you. You can just go and do it. You can do stuff every night of the week, and you never have to actually really look for it. And I think it's actually one of the things, like Melbourne. I was born in Melbourne. I love Melbourne, and I think there's a lot of amazing things about Melbourne. But I think that's one of the bad things about it. I think it's too easy to exist in a cultural sense in Melbourne, even if you're just as a consumer. You've at least just got to look in Brisbane. Like there's heaps on. You can go out and do stuff pretty much every night of the week if you want to. It's good quality cultural events and all very worthwhile. You just got to just put in that really relatively small effort into going and looking for it. I used to go out. I used to be going out 3, 4, 5 nights a week every week, going and seeing shows. I did that for years, and I've only really stopped doing that when I started working and doing the studio, and I was just sort of hammered with work for that and running my own venue. So since then I've sort of cut back on how many shows I go to, and I actually don't really go to that many anymore, which is kind of a bad thing, I think. But I'm getting old. I'm almost 30, but there's plenty out there.
So going back to 2008, when you put out Stranded, was that successful?
Yeah, I thought so. Like, it made its money back, and we gave money away for charity. There's inevitably people who thought that it didn't represent the Brisbane scene, and it never really. The byline was Brisbane music 2007, 2008, but it never really intended to represent everything. There wasn't much of. It was mostly rock music and indie music and related things. Like there was some folk and some country and some hip hop and things like that. But by and large, most of it was relatively sort of guitar-based stuff, or sort of pop songs of various things. But like there was punk, and there was noise rock and all sorts of things. And yeah, I thought it was a great success. Like, it was really. It seemed to get around. And
did it lead to this idea that you could have one central place where Brisbane bands could just put their music and you would be able to browse through it, like a curated section?
Yeah, I had that idea for a while of making some sort of. I sort of started making a part of this website where that was going to happen, and then someone pointed out Bandcamp to me. I was like, oh, I probably don't really need to do this. So I pretty much made it. It was pretty much existed. Like, it was pretty much done. And then Bandcamp. Oh, okay. Well.
And this website was Incremental Records, which was originally supposed to be a full-on record label, wasn't it?
It was, for a little while. At first, it was kind of a vanity label, it was just a label that, like as in like the most literal sense, a label for music that I'd done, that I just didn't want it to just be sitting out there on its own. So it just gave it an air of legitimacy, which it didn't really have. But maybe for people who didn't actually put any research into it, maybe it looked like someone out there actually gave a shit about this music. So that was how it started. And then at one point I was kind of like, I wanted to actually start making it into a real label. And I started talking to bands that I liked and who I'd worked with. And I ended up sort of talking them and myself out of doing it. I was kind of like, oh, well, I'll do this for you and this for you. But really, you should learn how to do that yourself. I mean, it's much better if you do it yourself. And I'll do this for you, and you should probably do that yourself as well. So, and through the course of talking to them, by the end, I was like, you know what, you should just do this yourself. You'll be much better off. And so, after doing that a couple of times, I was just like, I just don't think I have anything to offer. That like I feel like that bands would be better off doing it themselves. So I kind of put that idea on hold.
So was the idea that you would provide like promotional services, management, booking, that sort of stuff?
Just sort of, give a bit of money because this was when I had a job, like a real job, 9-to-5 job. So I had a little bit of money, and just give them a bit of money to help get it made and get it into stores and get some promo out. I didn't really want to manage or book shows for anyone. I wasn't really. Yeah, that's the bad bit of being in a band in the first place. So I didn't want to do it for someone else. There are people out there who like doing that stuff. I'll leave it to them. Yeah, so it was just the idea of that. But then I just kind of figured out, look, if you guys pay for the record yourselves, it means you get all the money back. And if you do the promo, it doesn't take much. You just need to know where to send it, and you can find that out. And you can do it yourself. It doesn't take that long. You just got to sit down and churn it out every now and again.
Do you think any bands really need a record label anymore?
I think anyone needs it. Some bands want to do certain things, and having a record label is probably going to help them a lot with doing that. So yeah, I suppose it more comes down to what do you want to do as a band. Like if you want to be a band that gets played a lot on, at the very least Triple J and plays festivals and all that, gets the big corporate shows and gets a good guarantee that maybe you don't even really deserve. Maybe you don't even pull that many people. But if you get a manager and a record label and all that, then you're more likely to fulfill those goals. And and some bands, that's really what they want to do, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. And some bands really don't care that much, and there's nothing wrong with that either. And some bands are in the middle. Most bands, I suppose, are in the middle. Most bands kind of care up until the point where they have to do all that work, and then they want someone else to do it for them. That's probably 90% of bands, right there. 90% of musicians.
The record label part of Incremental Records didn't really pan out, but the other side of that was the production side of you recording bands.
Studio, yeah.
Which had been going on for a while already.
Yeah, well, that was kind of the name that I put on. First, I called it Sunlit Mobile Studios because I had a Sunlit computer. That was the name. That was the brand.
Were there copyright issues with that?
I never made it that far along. And then I got rid of the Sunlit computer, so there's no point to call it that anymore. And I had this idea of calling it Incremental, because the idea was like I just kept wanting to I'd record a band, and I used to record for free, but I sort of had this thing like if they want to give me money, I would never expect it. I never asked for it, but sometimes people would just feel obliged, and then so if I got anything, I'd always put it straight back into the studio, and so it would incrementally grow. Incrementally the recording would get better as I just got better, and also as the gear got better, and as the bands that I recorded got better too, I suppose. So yeah, it became Incremental Records at some point. I was doing my own bands, and then somehow Mass Migration found out. I think I was just talking to them at the hangar, I think it might have been, and I just kind of mentioned that I did recordings, and if they wanted to just do some recording, just see how it sounds, and we'd get together. So we got together and we just recorded demos, and they sounded okay, and they liked working with me. So it was kind of like, all right, let's do a real record. So that was the first thing that I did that wasn't my own band, was Mass Migration. And then I just kind of lucked into like a bunch of bands that did well, like out of the recordings that we made. So like one of the first bands was Little Scout doing their first EP, and that had a couple of like pretty successful songs on like national radio, like on Triple J, I guess.
Dead Loss did pretty well for a while.
Yeah, Dead Loss was like the big one, and through community radio all around the country, and then did DZ Death Rays, and just did DZ Death Rays because I knew Shane, because his girlfriend at the time was my sister's best friend, and he kind of knew that I had a little setup, they weren't a big band at the time. I don't even know if they had management when they started with me. Maybe at some point through the process, I think they gained management, they gained a label. But yeah, they came in and recorded me, and that was really big, that EP. And it did no anchor, as I was sort of talking about before. Like, that just kind of came through, and that didn't get played on bigger radio stations, but it got a lot of critical praise in certain circles,
local circles.
Yeah, and interstate. Like, it did pretty well for them. Like, a lot of people liked that record, and Luma, and so I just kind of lucked into doing like a lot of good bands. And Running Guns.
Running Guns, were they the first band who you didn't actually know to come up and ask you to record?
Yeah, I just got this email, and they were just like, "Hey, so you record bands? You want to record us?" Sure. Yeah. So they came in. I'd never met any of them before.
So that was when... Was Jeremy in the band?
No, he wasn't in the band. It was the four-piece. So it was before he joined. And they did that first self-titled album, which sounds alright, I suppose. Like, could have done a better job, but they were pretty new, and I was pretty new, and it sounds alright, considering the circumstances. And the songs were good, and they were happy. And they came back again and did another record. And then through that got Velociraptor. Because by then Jeremy had joined the band, and he came in and did a record with Running Guns, and came in and did another record with Raptors, which ended up being that first 7-inch of theirs. And
was that Oh Yeah?
Oh Yeah, it was on it, and Hey Suzanne, and Sleeps with the Fishes, and Stoner Beaten, and there was 5 songs, and the other big single from it, I can't remember what it was called. And ever since then it just kind of snowballed. And then did a bunch of bands that won like the Unearthed competition. Like it was kind of 3 or 4 of them in a row. It was like Millions, June Rats, Gung Ho, all of that, and then just grown since then. Done lots of records that I really like. Nico, also working with Turnpike. Bands that I were part of the reason for me starting to play music. I've now worked with so Turnpike is one, and Seaplane, and the Rational Academy. Really amazing bands that I feel really, really lucky to have worked with in any way. Let alone have do something that because it's quite intimate recording a record with someone. Like, it's kind of a vulnerable place for a lot of people when they're doing that, and you actually get to know them quite well because you're spending fairly long days in a room with them, and so you sort of getting a insight into that creative process, and maybe you contribute in some way, maybe you don't, maybe you're just the guy pressing record and putting the mics in the right place. But some bands want some feedback, and some bands don't.
And you've said that you're always prepared to fill whatever role the bands need in a recording engineer, whether they lead a lot of input or whether, as you said, just the guy to push the buttons.
Yeah, I mean, it's more difficult when it's a band that you like. If it's a band that you don't know that well, like if you don't know them as people or as a band, like musically beforehand, then it's a bit more difficult to make creative suggestions. I tend not to, unless I sense that they're having difficulty or they specifically ask. If they don't ask, and it doesn't seem like there's any like really pressing need to make creative suggestions, I won't. Because I mean, it's their band, and if they wanted my input, they'll ask for it, assumedly. And I just want to make a record that sounds like that band, and where you get the sense of the personality. I just want to make sort of an optimal version of what the band is. Just sort of what that band sounds like on a good day. If you caught them in the exact circumstances that, where everything came together. I don't really care too much for making like a big polished, created blockbuster of a record.
A real production.
Yeah.
You just want to capture.
Yeah, I'd rather just record the band. I don't really want to fill it up with all these extra instruments and stuff. I mean, if that's what they want to do, I'll do it. But I'm not necessarily the one who wants to be pushing for that as such. I'll make a suggestion if I hear something and they want it, but that's kind of about as far as I I'll take it. So yeah.
So Incremental Studios started originally at Taringa, and then it moved to Browning Street Studios.
Yep, in West End. Yeah.
In West End. So, and you'd been putting on gigs there for a while?
Yeah, I'd sort of been. So it was Browning Street Studios. It's run by Sarah Gall, and I'd already been putting on shows there because my friend Adrian from Ghost Notes and Buildings Melt, he knew of her. I think they'd been friends for a while, and he knew that she had this space, and we started putting on shows there, and we started doing this monthly night called Almost Invisible, which was sort of a experimental, slightly experimental, not super experimental. It's a night of vaguely experimental music each month, and I started putting on my own shows there as well. When the Taringa space I'd been using stopped being viable, I was looking for a space, and they offered for me to rent out their rehearsal room underneath the venue space for a pretty cheap price on weekdays outside of the hours from when it was being used as an actual rehearsal space. I was working out of there for a couple of years, and eventually Sarah decided that she didn't want to keep running that space anymore because they had a space they'd hired or leased the building a couple of doors down, which was a bigger place and suited their needs more. So she didn't want to keep running 11 Browning Street, and so I ended up taking over the lease, and mostly because I didn't have a studio space to move into. I didn't have anything ready, and it was going to be difficult for me. And I'd sort of, by that stage, the studio was what I did. It was my job full time. So I decided to take it over so I could have a place to keep making income, but also because I wanted to start using the upstairs space as a more regular, sort of somewhat more legitimate venue, because they did shows there, but they were kind of only like 1 or 2 a month, whereas I was sort of thinking you could do 2 or 3 nights a weekend. I took over the space and renamed it the Waiting Room
After the Fugazi song,
which I feel bad about now because there was a Brisbane band called Waiting Room, and I stole their name.
Did they ever play at the Waiting Room?
No, they didn't.
That's
but I did feel a bit guilty. But at the same time, I don't know, if you're a band calling yourself Waiting Room, you gotta expect that. It's like being a band calling yourself Ghost Notes. There's going to be other bands called that, and the Waiting Room. There's lots of venues called the Waiting Room. They're all over the world, so it's not particularly unique. So yeah, maybe I would have gone with a different name if I'd actually thought about it for a little bit more. I just always had this thing that I always wanted to have a venue called the Waiting Room. It was just, I don't know, this crazy dream that I'd had. And so when I had this space, it's like, yes, I'll call it the Waiting Room. And that was as much thought as there was.
How did you find the recording space at Browning Street while Incremental was there? Yeah,
it was fine. I had to adjust because the space at Taringa was quite big space. It had a kind of a low ceiling, but it was a big space, so it was it actually sounded pretty okay considering. And then moving into Browning Street was a much more cramped in comparison. It's still pretty good. I mean, it's not a super small room. And I did have in Browning Street kind of a control room, which I never had at Taringa. Taringa was just a 1-room studio. So yeah, I had this little room, this tiny little. It was really just a closet. If I put my arms out, I could touch both walls. So it's only like 6. It was like 6 foot by 10 foot. That's pretty small for a control room. You couldn't really fit more than 2 people in there at once. But yeah, I worked out of there for about 3 years or something, until eventually I made a purpose-built studio space under my house in Cooperoo.
Which is where we are now, dear listener.
We are in my studio.
It's very, very nice.
Yep. It's pretty comfy. I like it here.
So is this really your dream studio that you had built to your specs?
It's not really my dream studio, just because we're limited with space, but it's pretty nice. I could do a lot worse. It would be nice to have more space, and it's back to being just the 1-room studio. But we could maybe, there's possibilities we could extend it in the future if need be. So I'm perfectly happy in here, and I've made some records that I've been quite happy with sonically, and it seems pretty nice. It's nice just being able to walk down from my house, sit on the back deck having a coffee in the morning, waiting for the band to arrive, and then just walking down the back steps and being at work and walking back upstairs at the end of the day.
As a musician, it must be quite a luxury to have pretty much always had your own studio where you can go and record at any time.
Yeah, it is a luxury. Sometimes it's a bit of a mixed blessing, because sometimes you can record whenever you want, so you don't. Or you sort of you go and get organized to go and record, and you get there and you're kind of like, let's go get a coffee. You go get a coffee, and then you go and record for a couple of hours, and you intend to record for the whole day. You end up only doing like 3 or 4 hours instead of 8, which is what you do if you kind of do at least 8. If you were paying for the studio, you've paid for it, you better use it. If you're not paying for it, you don't have quite the urgency to get stuff done. But it does mean you can, as long as you can motivate yourself, you can sit there and do what you want. You can take the time. But again, that also has issues, because sometimes you just keep working on stuff forever. It never gets done. That's what happened with the Mount Augustus album. It's just sat there tinkering with it for years, until eventually I just got tired of tinkering with it. I just thought, no, it has to come out. It has to be an album. I've got to finish it, And so Tiny Spiders was a little bit like that, where we just it was a little bit of just tinkering and sitting on it, and months at a time going past where we didn't really make any progress, till eventually we were just like, no, we need to get this done. Need to get it finished. With Ghost Notes, we don't really have that problem, because there's 5 of us, and a lot of people have full-time jobs. It's harder to get us all together in one space for a period of time, and there's a lot to set up too. Like, there's 5 instruments, so we need an acoustic piano. So it can be a bit of an ordeal to get us all set up for recording. So we make sure that when we record, we block out a full week, and we all take time off work, and we book the space, because usually we don't actually record in the studio, because we need the piano, and up until very recently we haven't had that.
You've recorded your albums at the old museum for Ghost Notes?
Well, the first one was done at Jamie and Luke's house in Highgate Hill, or Dutton Park actually. And so and that was I think it was the guitars and bass in one room, the piano in another room, and the trumpet out in the kitchen. So they couldn't see each other, which is amazing if you listen to that record. It's got all these long gaps, and then the band comes back in and stuff, and they were perfectly in time with each other. I couldn't fathom how they were doing it. So, but somehow they managed to do it, and they were very few takes where they weren't pretty bang on. And then the second one we did the old museum, and then the next one and the one that's coming after that we recorded last year at the waiting room. We moved all the studio from the downstairs studio upstairs, and we sort of did it on weekends when nothing was booked at the waiting room, and sort of through the evenings during the week. But we couldn't do it. It was kind of difficult because we couldn't go very late because we didn't want to annoy the neighbours. We couldn't go very early because there were neighbouring businesses, and there was a drum teacher downstairs, and the drums would come up. So we'd get in there at 6, and maybe we couldn't do anything till 7:30 because we'd have to wait for the drum teacher to finish his lessons, and then we'd have an hour and a half until 9 o'clock, when it's starting to get a bit late to be loud, to actually do the tracking. So we'd sort of get in there and do these little snippets, and we'd try and get out a song or two in an evening. And we did sort of 1 week like that in April, and then another week like that in June last year. And between that, we recorded 12 songs. So that's pretty much the next 2 albums.
Have you ever actually yourself recorded in an actual studio that's not your own?
Never been inside one. Never been in another person's studio, a real commercial studio. The closest I've been, I went into SAE once at Milton. And then just friends' studios, Donovan Miller's studio, Nowhere Audio, out at West End, and Branko from Takeoff, Branko Kozic's studio, down in Kingston, and that's it. Never really been in a real. Oh, actually, one time when I was down at Irene Community Warehouse, they had a little studio sort of in there, kind of a bit of a DIY kind of thing. So yeah, I've only ever been in DIY studios. I've never been like a real commercial facility that's been like properly made as a studio.
The fact that you haven't had an experience in a commercial studio, do you think that contributes at all to the way you do things?
Probably. Yeah, I mean, everything that I've learnt, I don't do anything weird. Like, I don't do anything that's not, fairly traditional methods. It's just that I've learnt them not by being taught or shown by someone who really knows what they're doing. I've learned it by reading books and magazines and watching videos on the internet and just like trial and error on my own, and then putting that into practice. So and learning the theory behind why things work and why things sound the way they sound, and putting that theory into practice and sort of saying, well, if this is the case and this is the case, then I should be able to do this and it should work. And sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
Do you think you have a particular sound as a producer?
Yeah, I think I do. And I don't know what makes it. Branko is always very fond of saying that I have a sound. Whenever he hears a new recording, he's like, it's got that Cam Smith sound. What is it? What is it that you do that makes all your recordings have that sound? I'm like, I don't know. If I knew, I'd probably try and get rid of it. But I don't know what it is. I think it's just the way that I hear sound. That's what comes out when I work with sound. The way that I've learnt to work with it and hear it means it comes out sounding like this. And I think everyone has that. I mean, I certainly think Branko has his sound, Donnie has his sound, Magoo has his sound, Albini has his sound. Everyone's got their sound. Butch Vig.
It's just something that happens rather than something you set out to establish.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, maybe there's some people out there who, want a certain sound and work really hard to get it, like that particular thing that they do. But I just sound the way that I sound. I listen to my recordings and think about things that I don't like about them, and I try and get better at them. Like I don't know. I used to be really bad at recording instrument X, and then I thought about it a bit more and got better at it. And it's just the way it works.
Do you find people are actively coming up and approaching your studio now in an attempt to get your sound?
Yeah, I got that. Especially ever since like a lot of those garage rock bands that sort of did well a couple of years ago, like like Raptors and Millions and all that, and people would come in and say, "Oh, we want you to give us out that Millions sound." I'm like, well, I suppose I can do. I can try.
How do you feel about that when people ask you for what your sound, which you yourself can't?
It's kind of interesting because I don't really think of that as my sound. I think of that's like one version. That's my sound put into a specific other sound. It's my version of that sound. It's like, Millions sounds like that, but No Anchor doesn't sound like that at all, and Ghost Notes doesn't sound like either of those things. But yeah, you can hear sonic qualities in all three that are common, but they don't necessarily. It's not the same style of recording necessarily. But I mean, I just take it. It's flattering, I suppose. It's not. They mean it to be flattering, I guess. Like it means they liked the recording and they want their band to sound like that.
But do you think it's concerning at all, going back to that notion of bands being themselves rather than trying to be someone else?
Yeah, I think a lot of that's just like bands. I suppose there's two ways you can see it. One is like, well, they want to sound like that because that was a successful sound for someone. That was this the now thing. But the other thing is that when you're faced with all these different choices, there's so many choices you can make, especially when you're in recording. Sometimes it's nice just to be like, that's a good sound. That sound fits our band. We should go and try and utilize that band. We should put that sound around our band because it would be a good fit. I think that's fine. So if people want to do that, it's just one less decision to agonize over. If it's already if you can already hear someone go, they make a record that sounds good, that I like, that would work for us, let's do that. I'd go and record with Albini for Ghost Notes. We'd love to do an Albini record because he does that sound amazingly well. Like he's, like Ocean Songs for Dirty Three, and lots of like Nina Nostalgia records, and all that sort of stuff. He does that really earthy, organic kind of sound, fairly dynamic. He does it really well. But we just need to get more money and become better players so that we can do it
so you in won't that look situation. Like idiots in front of Albini.
Exactly, yeah, because we have to fudge it a fair bit on our records because we're not very good musicians.
So is Albini's sound something you try and take elements from at all?
Yeah, he's one of them. Like he's probably, I suppose, sonically, yeah, he's the big, and also like his philosophy on it being an engineer is really kind of inspiring, I suppose. He's someone I talk about a lot, and partially, and I always feel kind of embarrassed talking about him because I bring him up so much. But part of that is because he's just very open. Like there's more interviews with him, partially because he's also a famous musician and worked on famous records, and he's kind of outspoken, so people want to talk to him. But there's more interviews out there with Albini than there are with Dave Fridman, for example. And that's someone else. I really like certain Dave Fridman recordings. I like what he does. I like some of the sounds he gets, and I like lots of engineers. There's lots of good. I would love to find out how Bryce Moorhead, the Brisbane engineer, gets sounds that he does, because he's amazing. He's like, his engineering is, in my opinion, he's by far the best engineer to be in Brisbane while I've been here. He's an excellent engineer, and unfortunately he's pretty much quit these days. Yeah. Although apparently Violet Soho have coaxed him out of retirement to record their record, but he's an excellent engineer. His records sound fantastic. I think from what I've heard, he's like exceedingly detail oriented and focused on procedures. Like it's all very scientific, and he's got an excellent ear. Much better than like his theoretical knowledge and his ear are kind of beyond reproach from everything I've heard. Both in terms of like listening to his recordings and also from hearing from people who've recorded with him.
You're a big fan of Steve Albini. So what does that punk DIY ethic mean to you?
Well, I guess in a sense it's very important. I suppose it kind of underpins everything that I do, certainly in music, but also in other aspects of my life. And I just find I've always found it to be a very, and there are different aspects of punk. There's a very sort of in your face, kind of fuck with the system aspect to it. And that aspect doesn't really appeal to me as much, although I see the merit in it, and there are elements that I absolutely agree with and apply. But then there's more just, I suppose, the Fugazi approach, which is just, it's not even necessarily about taking it to the man. It's taking it from the man. It's like, let's make something that's not reliant on the man, if you're going to call it that. So it's just, let's make our own sustainable, ethical ways of existing where we feel comfortable with the moral decisions and the way that we're presenting ourselves to the world and the way that we're interacting with each other, and let's try and make something that's beautiful out of it, I suppose.
You said before, I just try to make the world around me more like the one I want to see by taking control of the aspects that I'm able to. I'm not trying to fight the system. I'm trying to find a way to exist parallel to it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm pretty well spoken, aren't I? Yeah, that's pretty much what I was trying to say.
And so I guess that's something that underpins not only your recording, but the way you put your own music out there.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, all of my bands all of the bands where I sort of have a say in these things. Because I play in bands where I'm just, like, I play in Tape Off, and I pretty much just play bass. I don't write the songs. I don't book shows. I don't do anything like that. I just turn up and play bass. But in the other band, like, so Augustus and Tiny Spiders and Ghost Notes, we just put our music out there for free on the internet, digital for free, and then we make something that is worthwhile, which in those cases has mostly been a nice vinyl product. And I'm not a vinyl fetishist because of like I don't think it sounds more authentic. I'm not one of these people who's like, oh well, it's analog and therefore it's real, and digital is not real because it's ones and zero. That's stupid to me, and I don't do it because I necessarily think CDs are dying. I do it because I like vinyl. I don't play in bands that have the money that we can just press stuff willy-nilly. We need to choose what we want to do because we have limited resources. And I would prefer that it was on vinyl than it was on CD, because in a lot of the stations it's an either-or scenario. So we do vinyl, and people. I find not a lot of people want CDs anymore. Like what all they do is they get the CD, they go home, they rip it onto the computer, and then it's never really touched again. So we just put it up for free on digital, because I personally don't think that digital is worth anything. It's too transitory. It's too easy to lose. You can delete your hard drive crashes and it's gone. I'm quite happy for people to have that for free, and obviously I would prefer that they got the nice physical product. And if more people bought it, then I could probably get the CDs as well. But I'm not at all unhappy with the number of people like who get Ghost Notes and Tiny Spiders records, and hopefully St. Augustus when it's finished.
Do you think the shift away from physical product and towards digital distribution has largely been an empowering thing for musicians, or a scary thing, given that then maybe not making as much money as they may have in the past?
Yeah, I think it's mostly. I think it's on the whole, it's a good thing. I think it's bad for a very small percentage of bands who, I guess, are operating on a very high economic level, but they're not my concern. I don't deal with those bands. I'm very unlikely to ever be in one of those bands. And while I don't think piracy is really justifiable in any way, at the same sense, I don't think it's justifiable to charge what people charge for a lot of downloads and stuff. So, but I think for the 99% of bands, of musicians, it's great. 99% of bands are people like you and me, who just play in bands, who love it, and it's like the driving force in their life. But it's not making them money, even on a small scale. It's usually costing them money, and it probably never will. And they're totally fine with that, and they have no real expectation of making a living out of it. Maybe they love, most musicians love to make a living out of it, but I think most of them are also realistic that it's very unlikely to ever happen. So all of a sudden you've just got this thing where your music can get out, anywhere. I mean, we just put out a Ghost Note single this week, and a week ago now. Yeah, there's like people from all over the world downloading it. You get emails, people and people paying us when they don't have to. Like, it's up for free. And people give us $10 for one song download. I think that's ridiculous, but I'm absolutely thrilled that they do it. It's amazing. And I've had people give me more than what I'm asking for the vinyl version for a download. I have people pay $50 for a T-shirt, because they want to support the band. They want to be a patron of the band, and they see a worth in what you're doing, and the product is secondary. They just want to support you, and that's great. And that's not really been available until now. And you can, and they don't have to have seen you at the local, bar or heard you on the radio. They can just come across you anywhere, like internet radio or on a blog, or someone sent them a link thinking that they might like it, and you can get anywhere. It's great.
But is that only when you have a finished product to give to someone? Like, do you also think it's a good idea for musicians to be part of this sort of Kickstarter possible thing where they get the money first, then they make the product?
Yeah, I'm in two minds about Possible and Kickstarter. I think it can be a very good thing and a very powerful thing. I think it can also be misused, and I think it's a fine line between misuse and like a genuine need, or like an honest need. And because sometimes you see bands or musicians, artists, whatever, and they're asking for money, and it's kind of like they've decided that they just want to live out their fantasy. You know, it's a bit of a wasteful use of resources. They could have made this product that they're wanting to make, and been more thrifty about it. They could have tightened their belt. They could have not got the big name producer who cost a fortune because he's a big name. There are other people out there they could have done it with. They could have done X. They could have done Y. And then there's also this like only thing with Kickstarter is, you offer rewards, and sometimes the rewards are just completely out of whack. And I suppose again that comes down to being a patron of the band, and like there's a very valid argument that no one's forcing anyone to give money. Like everyone's doing this willingly. But I think that sometimes that doesn't necessarily excuse people putting, or kind of, I guess, taking advantage of the fact. Like I've seen some where like, it's like hundreds of dollars and we'll play you a show on Skype, or $40 and you get a copy of the EP on CD. It's like, well, $40,
$1,000. We'll come to your house and give you a hug.
Yeah, well, yeah. I don't know. Maybe I pay $1,000 for certain people to come to my house and give me a hug. I mean, that's kind of unique. But yeah, I mean, like, just like if you're gonna sell a CD like on Possible, it should just be how much it's worth. You wouldn't sell that. You're not gonna sell the EP for $40 in stores. Don't do it on Possible. So yeah, I mean, there are lots of bands who do it really well. I think the Rash Academy did a really good one last year to fund the pressing of their record.
Ben Salter did his solo album like that, I think.
Yeah.
Scout did.
Yep, Little Scout. And see, Little Scout was one where I was a little bit iffy about that.
Because they did have the cookbook and the tea towel and the
Skype. They had some good stuff. Like, they had some interesting things that I didn't give them any money for because I thought they were all overpriced. And I'm glad that they got there, because I think their record's I think they're a really good band, and I think that their record would be really good. And I think that it'll sound really good. But at the same time, it did seem a little bit like rock and roll fantasy camp to go and like be given all this money to go over to America and get this thing done by a super mixing guy. But at the same time, no one forced anyone. Everyone's happy. It's a win-win scenario. All the people who gave their money gave it willingly, and they get what they want. The band gets what they want, and all those people want the band to get what they want. They want the band to make the album that they want to make. So, yeah, I'm conflicted because I'm a bit of a fuddy-duddy at age 29. But yeah, I feel funny, but I'm considering utilizing it for some of my projects in the future, but I would have to feel as though the rewards were worthwhile and that I was asking for something that was not overly extravagant and was not just a bit of an ego trip.
And on your end, you would keep the costs down, so you weren't asking for too much money.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose you can always. There could always be a bit of an Amanda Palmer situation where you ask for a certain amount of money and you get 10 times that. Do you know how much she originally asked for? Because I know she got over $1 million.
She got over $1 million. I don't know how much.
Yeah, I think it might have been like 100,000 or 200,000 or something.
Yeah.
So it was multiples of what she asked for. Mm. So I mean, yeah, the whole Amanda Palmer thing's a bit of an interesting scenario. And in one respect, it's kind of like, well, I don't know, she didn't ask for that much money. I mean, she's probably ecstatic that she got it, but at the same time, she may not have planned to what she's going to do with that much money. So if some of it gets spent a bit wastefully, I suppose there's a degree of forgiveness for that. But
Maybe she could actually pay some of her musicians with it.
Well, she did pay. She had a band that, like a backing band that toured with her. And they were paid. It was sort of like the guest musicians each night, and that was kind of like, you know, if you think it would be fun to come and play with us, you can do that. We won't pay you, but you can do it as long as you're like not a terrible musician. If you can half play, then you can join us because we're doing this thing where it would kind of fit. And in one respect, it's totally fine. But in another respect, she just got $1 million for nothing. Maybe she probably should give a little bit of that to these people. As your mate Steve Albini pointed out. Yeah. Steve wasn't completely right about that one, but he had a lot of good points. I mean, it is $1 million. It's a lot of money. It is. It's more money than most people will see in their lifetime. I think you have to keep that in perspective. Like, I think you have to keep in perspective what's normal. You know, that normal is not playing the big stage at Big Day Out or packing out the Tivoli. That's not normal. That's one end of like kind of extreme success. Normal, and I think that's sometimes detrimental when people think that that's normal because that's what they see because it's everywhere because it gets the push. But normal is the band playing to 20 people on a Thursday night in some pub. You know, that's normal. That's most bands. You shouldn't feel bad if that's all your band ever gets to. And you shouldn't look down on bands that's what they do. It's not, you know, I'm sure they're having a lot of fun on that Thursday night with 20 people. I'm sure the 20 people are having a lot of fun too. That's awesome. They shouldn't need any more than that. That's enough it should be enough for everyone. That sort of fits in with how I think about this whole thing. It's like, everyone should just do what they enjoy. Because, I mean, even if you hate the music, who cares? There's someone there who's spending their time on a creative pursuit, who's putting, like, a lot of themselves and their emotion and their time and their money into something, putting themselves out there. And they could be doing all sorts of horrible things, you know, instead. They could be being a horrible person. But instead they're doing something that has an intrinsic beauty. Even if you hate it, even if you find it ugly, there's no denying that it has this beautiful aspect to it that can't be taken away by anyone. You turned 30 in 2 months. Are you happy with where you're at and what you've accomplished? Yeah, in a sense. I've accomplished a lot more than I thought I ever would in this sort of thing. Like, in the fact that I used to work a regular 9-to-5 job, and I got to a point where I was able to not do that anymore and do kind of my dream job, to run a studio and record bands that I like. And bands that I don't have any particular involvement with other than they came to my studio and trusted me with their recording, and I owe them the best of my abilities, and through that I, you know, got to know them. And yeah, that's something that, you know, that's more than I have expected, and I've been playing in bands for, you know, 12 years now, 13 years, like playing, you know, in bands that play shows and stuff. And some of those bands have had people say very nice things about them and have played shows that lots of people have come to. You know, maybe not, you know, compared to, you know, to big bands, but you know, they do pretty well. Get written about. People, you know, people say that some of my band's records are some of their favorite records. You know, that's amazing. That's really great. And I've been able to work with a lot of different people in all sorts of ways, and as band members and people who run venues and people who write magazines and street press and blogs and other recording engineers and all these sorts of people, artists. Yeah, so in a respect, in one respect, I feel massively successful, like way more successful, you know, and you know, I seem to be relatively well regarded for my engineering, which is kind of blows my mind. And in some respects, I feel like a complete sham because I'm 29 and I'd like to have a bit more of a normal life. I'd like to have a kid and get married and all that sort of stuff. And I feel like some of my choices have made some of those things a little bit more difficult. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad choices. It just means I've got further to go. Got to get better at it. So it's all that's comes down to incremental. You just got to just small steps. Just keep getting better. And the waiting room's like that too. Just keep it going for a little bit more, and see what you can do, and hopefully it'll turn out okay. So yeah.
Cam Smith, thank you for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. So, I feel like I shake your hand.
Yeah.
There you go.
If you want to hear music from any of Cam's bands, most of them have their stuff up on Bandcamp. Some of them probably also have their stuff up on more evil music distribution sites. They know who they are. Tune in next episode to hear my catch-up interview with Cam, recorded this morning as I am talking to you on this March evening in 2018. I've just spent the past month in the studio with Cam, doing a day and a half every week, recording some stuff for a project. And after we finished all the sessions, he very generously sat down and we did about an hour catch-up. I had a lot of follow-up questions about stuff that's happened in his life since then. And also he sings me a song. So stick around for that one in episode 30. Even more Cam Smith fun. Can you even contain yourselves? No, you can't. I didn't think so. Until next time, stay mushy. I just had some mushroom tea. Reishi. It's supposed to be good for you.